All righty, guys. We are in store for a wonderful, wonderful show tonight. Thank you all for bearing with us. We were going to go live yesterday, but we had some engagements that had to be taken care of. Thank goodness we were able to take care of and get rescheduled for today. So, without further ado, we are joined for a wonderful show today by Mr. Brew Taylor. He was 5th Special Forces Group, SOG, MACVSOG. He was at CCN. He started his career with SOG, working with the Hatchet Forces under one of our previous guests, Mr. John Bartlett. And after that, he was sent to MLT2, the launch site, and then for a period of time he was at, I believe, Firebase Fuller and NKP for a while before heading back to camp to go up on a new team, which was Recon Team North Carolina. He ran with them for a while under Mr. Billy Van Meter, I believe his name is. And then he went over and led RT Kansas for a period of time, and he's actually a graduate of the 1-0 school, so that'll be another interesting tidbit. So we've got a man with a lot of experience join us tonight, and I can't wait to hear from him and see what kind of questions y'all get up. So without any further ado, Brew, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having us. Well, I think I'll start out with the weird military career that got me into SOG, because you couldn't duplicate it if you tried. I graduated at high school in Alaska, and that year was a big year of forest fires, and I found myself out on a forest fire, and the district chief for the BLM was running the fire, and when he left me in charge of the fire. I was 18 at the time. And he signed off about 4 hours on a helicopter for me so I could fly around with the helicopter. So I flew around with a guy that was in Warrant Officer Class number 2 of the helicopter school. And he had flown for Air America and got shot down in the Ashau Valley flying a fixed-wing aircraft. And so he's back in Alaska flying helicopters. And he convinced me to go to helicopter school. I love helicopters. Still do. So I enlisted for helicopter school. I got to helicopter school, and like a lot of things in the Army, you get there and the records don't. So I was end up in a holding platoon. And there was an incident in which someone did something very uncouth, and the TAC officers thought it was me. And they told me that I was not going to graduate helicopter school. So amazingly, when I started my training, I started in that very TAC officer's platoon, and I ended up getting recycled into the platoon that had the assistant TAC officer, who is now the new TAC officer of the new platoon. And they had a good time with me, and in the end, I got relieved of duty as a company commander. So they rather pissed me off, to tell you the truth. So I just decided, well, I'm going to show them I can soldier, you know. So while I was company commander, the one who was my first sergeant had to drop out of training because of his wife's medical condition, and they made him the acting battalion first sergeant. So he came to me and he says, "Look, I know what happened." He says, "How can I help you?" And I said, "Well, 2 things. Promote me to PFC, and I want to go to Fort Ord for infantry training." And so lo and behold, I got promoted to PFC, and I went to Fort Ord for infantry training. So I'm at Fort Ord, and I'm with these guys we're all scheduled to go to 90th Repo in Vietnam. That's the general, you're going somewhere place. Well, by that time, I'd been in the Army several months, and I was a PFC. and I was the senior drill instructor made me the trainee senior drill instructor, which was, there's no such thing, but basically I did his job I made the company rosters. I took morning formations. I had E5 instant NCOs reporting to me in the mornings, and I was marching the company, and all this stuff was going on. And then I'm looking around at these guys, and I'm going, if I go to Vietnam with these guys, I'm dead. I mean, I know what they know, and they don't know nothing. So they had the airborne demonstration. I went and talked to the airborne guy. Well, if I go airborne, will I get more training? Oh, yeah, you get 3 weeks. You get it. I'm thinking, yeah, you jump out of the airplane. That ain't going to help me kill Charlie. So then I made my way to the Special Forces liaison office. They said, sign me up, boys. And it's like, well, it don't quite work that way. So I went down, took the test. I think there was 20 of us, 20 some anyway, and 2 of us passed. So when I got to airborne school, I had orders waiting to go to Ft.Bragg. So I go to Ft.Bragg, and they give you these tests and everything. And one of the tests they give you is a code test. It's called the RST test. That was because they send 3 letters in Morse code and see if you can copy them. Well, I maxed that out because I'd been a ham operator since I was 12 years old. So the end of training, they tell you where you're going to go MOS wise, and they told me you're going to go to commo school. I said, I don't want to go to commo school. Teach me something I don't know. I wanted to go to O&I because I had this kind of James Bond thing. I wanted to be James Bond. Finally, the captain came over to me and says, you're going to be a commo man. And I said, yes, sir. So I went to commo school. And to be very honest, at that time in my life, I was a real asshole. And the instructors didn't like having me around because I was a bit of a smart ass. So on all the theory classes first of all, I passed out of code school in 3 weeks because you had to send 15. There was something about 15 I couldn't do, so I passed at 22 words a minute. And then I go into the theory classes. In the theory classes, they decided they didn't want me sitting in their classes asking questions, so they sent me to the PX snack bar. So I spent most of my commo days in the PX snack bar. And whenever they'd have a new radio or a new piece of equipment, they'd tell me I could come to class and learn about that. And so that was that. Then we went out to the FTX, which is in Pisgah National Forest. And there's a really famous place there called the Linville Gorge. And normally the way it works in the combo thing is you're on one side of the gorge and they got all these sites for you. And you set up these combo sites and they rotate you around a little bit. And then everybody gets to go through the gorge and to the other side. Well, the idea is that you've got to make so much commo during this period of time. And even going through the gorge. Well, I think I was one of the few teams that never went through the gorge because I was making 100% commo at the time. They decided they were going to make sure that, even up the odds. So there was a place out there that had this magnetite deposit, and it would just like suck radio signals right out of the air. It was a terrible place. So they put me there for the entire time. After they moved me for a couple sites, they put me in there, and I never went through the gorge. So one of the things they told us was never interfere with another team's commo. If you do, it's goodbye. And the instructor said to us, quote, I can tell a 109 tuning up on the air anywhere. That 109 was our radio. And it had a very distinctive sound when you're tuning it up. Well, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, well, this is a little unfair that they're putting me on this site to make sure that I don't make commo, and everybody else was having a pretty good time. So I thought, well, I should even up the odds. So there is normally the 109 is crystal controlled. And you have a crystal for a receiver and crystal for the transmitter, and the receiver had a VFO in it. So you could tune the receiver, but you couldn't tune the transmitter. But there was a way that you could take the receiver and use it to tune the transmitter. So I figured out the commo schedules, and I figured out who was ahead of me, and I would go up and use a ham call sign and tune across their frequency while they was making commo, and even things up a little bit. So the day we all got our commo certificates, when I walked up to the front there, I said, "This is," and I gave the ham call sign I'd been using, and I said, "Yeah, and I can tune the 109 I can hear the 109 tuning up on the air anywhere." Everybody laughed because then they knew it was me interfering with them. But I had graduated, so there wasn't much they could do to me. Anyway, I went from there. I went to 6th group. I'm down to about that point about 89 days in the Army, something like that. And I'm thinking, this is kind of like training to be a brain surgeon and never doing an operation. I said, so I got to get out of here. So I called Mrs. Alexander. I'd called her once before. And so I called her up, and I can still remember her phone number until today. Washington, D.C., OX54070. So I called her up. And I said, Mrs. A, I need to go to either Okinawa or I need to go to Vietnam. I've got to extend, so I would like to do it as soon as possible. So this is like about the 3rd week of July. She says, I have an August 15 for Vietnam, if you want it. And I said, sounds good. So, in fact, I was supposed to go to promotion board the day I left, and I just decided, yeah, I'll get promoted in Vietnam, which was actually a mistake. I should have stayed one more day. But anyway, off I go, went sheep hunting with my dad in Alaska, and headed over to Vietnam. Well, before I left, my team sergeant on my A team had just returned from SOG. The only thing I knew about it was that I knew he ran Recon. I knew he'd been around Quezon, and he told me stories of the tank tracks and measuring them and watching elephants, and nobody believed him, And they're trying to tell him this was all before they hit Long Bay. So I didn't know in much detail about what SOG was. Of course, we'd all heard the SOG stories. Don't go to SOG. SOG is to death. When we were in training group, we're toasting SOG and death, but we have no idea what we're talking about. Neither does anybody else. But several of our instructors, in fact, were SOG guys. I had Franks and Worley with me, and they in fact, Worley got the DSC. And so we had SOG guys that were instructors, but nobody would tell us exactly what that was. But this guy says to me, he says, I think you'd do okay in SOG. So he drew me a map of Nha Trang, of the compound, and with the SOG liaison office so I could find it. And he says, you go in there and you talk to them and you tell them you want to go to SOG. And if they tell you, you tell them you want to go to NKP. And I go, what's NKP? He says, you don't need to know what NKP is. You just tell them that. I said, okay. So I head over to Vietnam, get up to Nha Trang, walk over to SOG office, walk in there. There's a E6, E7 in there. And walk in, he's got a Vietnamese secretary sitting there in the front door in a separate room. And then I go in to see him, and I said, I'd like to go to SOG. And it's like, yeah, okay, kid, And then, so I said, well, I'd like to go to NKP. He jumps out of that chair, goes around the corner. The secretary just went to lunch. He comes back, he said, it's a good thing my secretary went to lunch or you'd be going to jail. I go, whoa, that's interesting, And so this is the funny part now. He's blowing me off like we don't need you, right? When the orders come down on my orders, I'm the only one that says EM is a volunteer. Everybody else that says EM is assigned against a non-volunteer vacancy. They were so short of bodies, and Captain Bartlett can tell you, when we went to the field with him, we had exactly one guy. We had, I think, we had 4 squads, so we had four squad leaders, platoon sergeant, platoon leader, and then Pat Smith went along. Pat Smith had been a recon guy, and he was supposed to go in R&R, but he said, told me, he was my roommate. He says, I can't let you guys go out with nobody ever having an experience, ever being on the ground before. He says, I can't do that. So he went out with us. And so every one of us was brand new guys, just came in. I came in on the 28th of August, I think. And we were going out in like within the next 10 days. I think it was about 10 days. So anyway, they were so short of people up there, that they were basically throwing bodies right in and right out. And they told me, everybody else went to combat orientation course. They said, oh, you guys at SOG don't go to combat orientation course. You got your own. Yeah, my combat orientation course was Laos. But the problem was that you talk to different times and different people. Some people went through combat orientation, and we didn't, because they needed bodies right then. You can imagine if I'm hitting there and we're going to the field in 10 days, they didn't have time to spend, 10 days out there in combat orientation, which was a shame because it was actually a good course. I went down to do some team training at Hanfei later and saw what they were doing, and it was excellent. It would have been really great to have that under your belt, especially how to call air, because my calling air was OJT. So anyway, I get up the Hatchet Force, and well, when I got there, of course, you get the bus ride. You landed the thing, and they pull up with this bus full of bullet holes, because there was a lot of guys kind of holed up in the bus, I guess, and there's a shootout. So you got a bus full of bullet holes, and that's always encouraging, when you first get there, is to see all the bullet holes in the bus, and you're wondering if you're going to make it to the compound, So they pull up there and they take you into the compound, and then you get the briefing. They take you into the talk, and they pull back the curtain. I sent you that thing with the base areas on it. You might want to put that up if you got it. So the sergeant major gets up there. Sergeant major, the colonel, I don't remember who did. I think it was sergeant major. And he goes, well, I'm here to tell you that all those things that you heard about SOG is absolutely true. And then he pulls back that map, and you see those base areas outlined in Laos. And he says, gentlemen, this is where we're going. We go to Laos. And I'm going, well, I guess we're in it now. So they give us a briefing, and they said, well, because all these guys that come in with me were actually assigned against a non-volunteer vacancy. So meaning they couldn't be assigned down to Recon or HF. They had to volunteer. And they said, well, if you guys want to go to HF or you want to go to Recon. And I'm looking at this, and they told us that HF was platoon and company size, And Recon teams, we had a pretty good idea what that was. So I thought, well, I don't know nothing yet. So the best I can do is go around with a bunch of more people that I can at least have a little company when I'm out there, So I said I'd go to HF. So I go down and find out we're going out on a mission in about, I guess it was 10 days or something like that. I can't remember exactly. So the situation was at that time was we had two interpreters. We had an interpreter that interpreted from English to Vietnamese, and a second interpreter interpreted from Vietnamese to Brew. Well, I'm thinking, well, that guy's with the lieutenant, and I'm with my squad at the back of the line. How am I going to communicate to them? So I decided there's only one way to do this. I'm going to have to learn some of their language. Well, a couple of fortunate things. When Harvey Saul was there, and Harvey had run Recon with one of my commo instructors out of Quezon. And so I knew something about Harvey, so I looked up Harvey and told Harvey, I said, Harvey, I need to learn some Brew. Well, Harvey actually knew a few words, So he got me started. And he just told me, he told me a little bit about the brew and that, because he'd worked with the brew. And so he kind of got me started. So I took a notebook and I just went down and lived in the barracks with the brew for a while. And I started writing down words and, get online, stop, mines, ambush, these kind of everyday words that you need. And like all good soldiers anywhere in the world, when they're learning a new language, the soldiers of the other side always teach you the most colorful language. And so I learned some very colorful words in brew that applied to the Vietnamese. And the brew loved me talking to the Vietnamese and their secret language. And so we bonded over that. We had a special forces, Vietnamese special forces guy that went out with us who was not much of a guy, really. And nobody really liked him, but he was assigned to us. Anyway, when they always liked it when they would always interpret what he said, but they would never tell him what I said. And so they were having a lot of fun with that. Anyway, I spent a lot of time down there. And so this is where I spent so much time down there that a lot of the Americans started calling me Brew. Well, then later, the Brew thought that was pretty good, so they started calling me Sergeant Brew. So it got to the point I just made a name tag that said Brew on it and gave up on my actual name. So people that came in probably in October or so from then on didn't know my real name because my name tag was Brew, and that's about all they knew me as. Nobody knew my real name. In fact, when I came back from NKP, I'm walking down the boardwalk, and Sergeant Major Pillow had just come in, and he's walking the other way, and he goes, "Good morning, Sergeant Brew." Good morning, Sergeant Major. He found out later that there was no Brew in his roster. Anyway, so that's how I got the name Brew, and I got to be really tight with the Brew people and really enjoyed them a lot. So we ran our first mission, and it was interesting. We, if I recall correctly, and it may not, it's been a while. Seems to me we made contact like 7 times in 6 days. None of it heavy. They were just trying to slow us down, basically, because where we were operating was in the salient area there in Laos. And I went back in that area later, and that's it's called Muang Samoy, and that's actually a brew area in there. So they were basically slowing us down, trying to keep us away from their areas. And I know Captain Bartlett doesn't remember this or doesn't know about this, but I was watching our brew interpreter at the time, and I had a lot of suspicions about this guy because I would see when he talked to the brew, it was like the feedback wasn't good. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I always, and it could have been one of 2 things. One, we were operating in a brew area, and they wanted to make sure that we didn't tear things up too bad, or he was a double agent. Anyway, I remember the insert. This insert was one to remember. I flew with the commander of the 219th VNAF, the head of the King Bees. At that time, they said he had about 10,000 combat hours. And this guy could, I've been around helicopters and airplanes, but what he did with the helicopter was so unbelievable. We're sitting there about 3,000 feet. There are 6, if I recall right, we had 6 King Bees and I think 2 or 3 slicks on this insert. We're inserting on this really narrow ridge line. Kind of long, but it's narrow. And I'm on the lead ship. So we're up about 3,000 feet. We're looking down, kind of scattered clouds, and watching the Cobras work out over the LZs, and they finally give us a go-ahead. And he dumps this thing 90 degrees. He just turns the aircraft 90 degrees, and suddenly I'm looking straight at the ground, and we're falling out of the air. And I'm going, helicopters don't do this. And man, we fall right through the clouds, but we're in formation, 3 of us. we're in formation falling through the cloud. And I'm going, this ain't right. And here we go. And we get about 500 foot above that ridge line, and he pulls it back up, right side up again, pulls max pitch, match power, and this whole thing shaking like a big, like somebody grabbed a hold of it and just shook it in the air, And we touched down so soft. And I jumped straight out. Well, that wasn't the right thing to do. I mean, we got off the helicopter fast, but it was at about a 30-degree pitch on the slope. So I'm tumbling ass over tea kettles down the slope. Now, right before this mission, we were issued the first 30-round magazines issued at CCN for this mission. We each got one. Okay, we got one. And that was like gold, this was gold. So I'm rolling down the hill. I roll up, I got the radios. I'm heavy, I roll up. I'm in my get ready to fight position. And I look down and there's no magazine. So I lost the first 30-round magazine ever lost to Laos. A dubious honor. Anyway, we get word that there's movement out there, and we're moving pretty good clip to get off that hill. And I just come from Alaska, and I'm suffering from heat exhaustion because I'm carrying a pretty big load at the time. And I remember every time I sat down, I'd like pass out. Just go, I did whoop, and they wake me up, and I'm drinking water like crazy, and it ain't helping. And I remember we crossed the stream, and I got to fill up my water again. And I should say this. I'm going to tell a big story on myself. Being from Alaska, the land of frozen water, with no indoor pools, I couldn't swim. And when I figured when I got to SF, if they made me swim, I'd just jump in and swim. Swing, whatever happened, it was going to happen, but I was going to try, by God. Well, the guy that did all that stuff that was famous for doing that was Torres, and he was on leave. And then we had a big typhoon passed off the coast of North Carolina and rained on us for like 3 days, flooded everything that we had. And they didn't give us a swimming test. Well, in sixth group, we went out to an FTX, and we had a guy drown. So they decided to give everybody in group swimming test, except I was on orders for Vietnam, and I didn't need it. So next thing that happened was that I knew from talking to my team leader that if I went to CCN, it was in the north and in the mountains. So I'm thinking mountains, no water. So that's why I requested CCN. And that was right, because there's nothing over knee deep where I went. Anyway, we're out on this mission, and after the first day, the brew come to me and says, Tonsi, you eat hot pepper, you don't drink water. And I thought, well, I never heard that before. But I'm going like, hey, these guys live here. So whatever they say, that's what I'm going to do. So I wasn't used to eating hot food, but I put the peppers on, and pretty soon, all the recon missions, I used one canteen a day, and that included mixing up my rations. So hot food was kind of the answer for that one. It really helped me out. Anyway, I know Captain Bartlett's on here, so I'm going to tell a story on him. So I think it was day one, the first evening, first evening or second evening, he comes to me with a map, and he goes, do you know where we are? And I go, I haven't got a clue. Well, he wanted me to have a clue because I had a radio, So it's good for the radio guy to have a clue where you are. And he goes, why not? I said, well, sir, you forgot to tell me where the insert LZ was. And he goes, oh, okay. So then we got on to the map part. And I say one thing. That was the one thing I was actually fairly decent at was map reading. From Boy Scouts, and then when you go to flight training, they give you a lot of top-level map reading because in those days we didn't have GPSs or anything else for the helicopters. They read regular 1/25,000 maps, just like everybody else. So I had a lot of map reading there, and then I had more when I got into SF. So I was fairly decent on the maps and fairly decent on land navigation. So that really helped me out, especially running Recon. Anyway, we ran that mission and came back. Well, I should say this. I carried the KY-38 and the KY-28. That's the thing that you set the frequencies with on that thing for the entire mission, and it never worked one day. And I'm asking Captain Bartlett the entire time, sir, I want to blow this thing up. I want to shoot it full of holes. I want to bury it, No, you got to carry it. And I'm really upset because this thing, it ain't light. So anyway, we get back, and I'm sure that it's one of Captain Bartlett's favorite people, and along with mine was our new company commander that was coming in out of the security company so he could get his CIB. And he's trying to tell me that you cannot DF this. This is why we got to carry it, because you can't use direction finders. I want to say that most people think that the North Vietnamese were rather unsophisticated because they didn't have some of this stuff. Well, they were very sophisticated. Two things that they were very sophisticated at. They were very sophisticated at intelligence. They had some of the best intelligence operations around, second to none. And the second thing they were very good at was anti-aircraft, because they were trained by the Soviets, and they had lots of equipment and they had lots of people. So they had the latest Russian radio direction finding equipment out there. It was very, very good. They also had the little portable ones that was handheld. So they had to have the base stations that were very, very accurate and get the azimuths on you, and then they'd use the handhelds. They could triangulate you pretty close. So you had to be quite careful on that. And so what the KY devices did is what we call spread spectrum. They would take the signal and they'd spread it over a wide frequencies. And what would happen is you couldn't hear what was being transmitted, but you could still use a direction finder on it because it was still transmitting a signal. I tried to explain that to our new captain, who didn't understand that. So I said, well, I'm out of here. I'm not going to be around explaining stuff to people that has got wood in their head. So I went over to Recon Company, found a team, said, sure, come on over. So I was supposed to go there on a Sunday. Well, Saturday night, they come and got me and said, pack your stuff, you're going up to Quang Tri. And I said, whoa, that's not fun. I'm supposed to go to Recon. Well, a little side note here. Commo guys, right? Recon Company was absolutely stock full of Commo guys. Okay? Commo was everywhere but Commo. Commo hated to be in Commo. So they were in Hatchet Force, they were in Recon Company. Anywhere they could be that it wasn't Commo, that's where they were. Okay? It got so bad that, in fact, when I came back off my last mission, I wanted to go back to Hatchet Force, and they wouldn't let me because they had a directive that said no more Commo guys could be assigned to the Hatchet Force. So they used that on me. Of course, that was Sergeant Major Pillow. He didn't like me anyway. He could have sent me down there. I was secondary with weapons anyway, so he could have sent me there in weapons, but he wasn't going to do anything nice for me. Anyway, so the problem was that there were shorter Commo guys. So I got shanghaied, sent up to the launch site, and I was at the launch site for about not quite a week. And after I got there, like 3 or 4 days, I'm on radio watch and I'd fall asleep. I'd just pass out. Boom. And this happened twice. And then, the thing things are, the chase medic doesn't know what's wrong with me, and the captain isn't amused. So they were talking Article 15 because falling asleep on radio watch is a pretty important thing. You just don't do it. So at that time we had a new chase medic come in. That was Doc Whitmore. So the chase medic went out. Now this guy was a fantastic combat medic. He had gotten a DFC for saving a guy on doing a trichectomy while in the helicopter, doing a trichectomy with his knife, with his Swiss Army knife and a ballpoint pen. Saved the guy's life. Just an incredible guy like that. But no experience with the diseases. Okay. I've got malaria. So Doc Whitmore comes in, and Doc is E7. He'd been on the wards for a while and stuff. He was a pretty skookum guy. He'd been around. So Doc comes to me and says, we got a problem here. They're talking about you falling asleep. I said, yeah. He says, how often does this happen? I said, like every 48 hours, come here tomorrow at 11 o'clock. I'll be passed out on the floor. He says, okay, I'll be here. He came in there. There I was. Took me down to the hospital. Temperature's 106, full-blown malaria. So they take me over. I learned something that day. Navy medics and Marine Corps hospitals. You don't want to be in that place. No, it's not a good place. They didn't have a real high regard for SF. So I remember being in this ward. The beds are like a foot apart. I'm so weak I can't go from one bed to the next bed standing up. And I'd get these dry heaves, and the only way I could get outside was crawl. I didn't want to dry heave. I didn't want to heave on the floor. So I'd crawl outside down the stairs, and then the medics would sit there at their desk and just watch me go by. It's like, okay, that's good. So I'm there for like 3 days, and they sent me down to the dang hospital. Well, by the time I got to the dang hospital, it was about half okay because they've been giving me the meds, Now, here's a funny story for you. When I was at Ft.Bragg, I got pneumonia. They stick me in the hospital. I had double pneumonia when I came back off of Como FTX. And had a brand new, just graduated second lieutenant nurse who's on the ward. She's about 5'11", big girl, good Midwestern girl, typical German. And she's trying to assert herself in her rank. It's not working well. I'm breaking the rules. I have pneumonia, but I'm smoking, This guy is we have an orderly is trying to get me to do his job by waking me up 5 o'clock in the morning to mop the floors, and I'm turning the lights off and telling him to get lost. And we got an SF medic on the floor later getting his OJT, and he straightened the guy out for me. But I used to call her Lieutenant Butterbar. One time she thinks she's going to get the upper hand on me. She's got to give me a big penicillin shot in my cheeks, right? So she comes in the room with this needle, holding it up, and says, "Drop your drawers." So I did. She fled. So I'm walking down the corridor in Da Nang Hospital, and lo and behold, who should I see? Lieutenant Butterbar walking the other way. And I go, "Butterbar!" And she goes, "I came to Vietnam to get away from you." Funny things that happen in war. Anyway, I get out of the hospital. I go back up to the MLT. And they're kind of thinking what they want to do. I got to tell you the one funny thing that happened when I was at the Pung Tree. This was great. So every day we got a package from the 101st Airborne Aviation, usually the Lancers, and I forget the name of the Cobras. And we had two different Cobra groups. One of them was, I remember, was a think it was the 177th Aerial Rocket Artillery was one that just had nothing but huge amounts of rockets on that thing. And anyway, so they get a new air liaison officer over to 101st Airborne. His job, of course, is coordinate with all the different units he's got to supply stuff to, right? So he calls over the launch site, and I answer the phone. And this is Captain so-and-so, and I want to know what you're doing with my planes because, last year you lost 50% of my helicopters, and I don't like this, And I go, well, sir, if you had a need to know, they would have briefed you. But because you don't have a need to know, they didn't brief you, and I can't tell you either. I enjoy doing things like that. So the captain decides, well, I'm going to find out where my helicopters are going. So he gets in a Huey and he follows an insert package. Well, Covey looks around and said to his lead, didn't we bring 4 helicopters, 4 slicks? And he says, yeah. He says, what's the 5th one doing back there? And he goes, I have no idea. So he calls down to the launch site, who calls down to Saigon. Saigon calls back up to 101st Airborne, commanding general of 101st Airborne, and says, you got a problem, and you need to fix this problem as soon as possible. So they come back, and when the air liaison officer lands on the runway there, the commanding general of 101st Airborne is waiting for him. Well, you know how it is when somebody takes a chunk out of the rear end of a commanding general of the 101st, and you're the captain, things don't go well for you. So I hear this story, and I'm giggling, of course. And about a week later, we had a Cobra go down the AO, and it was a chip detector. It's a metal detection system that's built into their transmissions. If they detect metal chips, they have to make a precautionary landing. So they did. They landed in Laos, precautionary. Slick landed and picked up the 2 pilots, and then called in to us to say, we want to blow it up now. So I called this ALO. Sir, we have a Cobra down in X-ray Delta AO. And the pilots landed. They informed us it was a chip detector light. They're not sure if it's just a sensor malfunction or if there's actually a problem with the transmission. But I'd like your permission to blow it up. And he goes, what? I said, yes, sir. If you just give me your initials, I'm going to blow it up in place. So he gave me his initials, but it was like one of those juicy days, Anyway, I go up to Fuller. We had a radio relay on top of Fuller. And Fuller Fire Support Base was Dong Hao Mountain. And it was just south of the DMZ. So it was a battery of 105s. They had an infantry company up there, and they had a bunch of other miscellaneous people around there. The other miscellaneous was the Army Security Agency Radio Research Unit, they called themselves, the intercept guys. So I remember the first night I'm up there, me and Craig Stevenson, and all of a sudden, man, fire erupts all around this base, and I get my gun, I'm ready to go out the door, and Craig goes, take it easy, it's a mad minute. I go, mad minute? What the heck's a mad minute? He goes, every night just before sundown, they all go out to the bunker line and fire, a couple magazines. And I go, why they do that? Well, in case, Charlie's out there somewhere in the bush, it'll mess things up. And I'm thinking, yeah, they're sitting there, they're mapping all the machine gun positions is what they're doing. Anyway, so we're sitting there, and the only people on top of that mountain that had an idea what we were doing were the Army Security Agency guys. We were the only 2 groups up there that actually knew what was going on in the world. And this captain that was in charge of this infantry company up there, he thought he knew what was going on in the world. He was Mr. Combat Infantryman. And he said to me one time, well, why you guys in the Special Forces why aren't you over there on the Ho Chi Minh Trail sneaking and peeking and telling us who's coming down the trail? And I'm thinking, well, guess what? But you can't say anything. So it isn't a couple of days later when we're completely socked in, and there's sensor strings north of us between the DMZ and the border, and they start going off that night, and this guy goes nuts. He has Spooky up there, and they're working out, and somewhere I've got some pictures of that, and they're working out all night long. The next day, 0-0 weather. They're bringing in Chinooks full of ammo. They brought a platoon up to reinforce things, and they're doing all this stuff like, the divisions are going to come running down the DMZ at us. So another day or so, it clears up, and we're sitting there, and we get a runner comes up and says, come down to the landing zone. The battalion commander wants to talk with us. I go, what in the world do you want to talk to us for, Well, it turns out that the battalion commander had been in Special Forces before, as well as his XO. And so we go down the landing zone. The captain's there, and this colonel's there, and his XO, the major's there. And the colonel says to me, I hear you guys are moving. I said, yes, sir, we are. He said, where are you moving? I said, about 40 kilometers west of here, the Hill 950 out in Quezon. And there was, the way things were, there were no American units west of where we were. So it was like Indian country out there. I think there was, the west would have been Mylock, Camp Carroll, and I don't know if the rock pile had any people on it at the time. Anyway, so he says, so what are you going to have for security? I said, well, we're going to have a platoon of Montagnards. And then he says to me, well, what do you think of this situation here? He's doing this for the captain's sake. And I said, well, sir, if I was sitting on top of this mountain with a battery of 105 and a reinforced rifle company, I'd tell Charlie to come on up because I'd have something for him. Anyway, that was my little payback to the captain and his what are you guys doing thing. So we were waiting for Canucks to lift us over to Hickory, and we had a scheduled date, and that ended up getting zeroed out because they had some other priority. And the thing about us, when they took us out to Hickory, they couldn't just take the Chinook and take us out there. They had to take 2 Chinooks and 4 Cobra gunships to take us out. So this package comes up. So we call down the launch site and say, hey, permission to leave. And they're telling us, don't bother us. We got a prairie fire. So we go, okay. So I make a command decision. We're leaving. So we tell the choppers, hook us up. We're going because we've been waiting for a week for this package anyway. So off we go, head over to Hickory. They lift us into Hickory, and we what this is a plywood like a camper that goes on the back of a deuce and a half that normally holds radios. So we'd build a shelf along one end of it. Crosswise we built a shelf at one end, and we had two cots in there. And the shelf we had for the radios, and so that was our commo shack. And you lived in the commo shack. And so we get there, and so it was kind of late in the day. We didn't have time to do much that day. We just basically set it up, set up the radios. And then here's a funny thing. So I called down to, finally they come on the site and wonder what do we want to bother them about. And we said, well, we moved. We're at Hickory now. They said, okay. You can just see the radio. They got sandbags around it, but that's the radio shack there. They're on the right with the radio antennas. So I called down to talk through the Da Nang base and let them know that I moved. So when you do that, you're supposed to use your authenticator. Okay. Well, my authenticator was 13. Everybody had a different authenticator code word. Mine was 13. So I give him authenticator 13. He goes, "Is that you, Brew?" Okay. So that was it. So much for the authenticators. So next morning we wake up and we're sitting there and running the radios, and Stevenson's standing over near the door, and I'm on the radio, and we get hit with one of our own mortars, one Stevenson, and it was an accident, wasn't it, Big O? Big O, I forgive you. I just want you to know that. I'm not sure if Stevenson's over it yet, but I forgive you. But that is one. So anyway, we called for medevac. The medevac pilot come out, and I heard he was on his last week in Vietnam. This guy was incredible. Flew out single ship, no gunships, no nothing, through the Quezon Son Valley, which was notorious for anti-aircraft. Flies up to the mountain, and we're socked in on top of the hill. I can't see 50 feet. He has me key up the radio. He homes in on the signal, hovers up the mountain, and lands. When he landed, which was not more than 50 feet away, I couldn't see him. He gets Stevenson, off he goes. These guys are just, I mean, salute to all the chopper pilots, man. They're just an amazing group of guys. And I'll tell you later why I was glad I didn't go to finish helicopter school. But anyway, so I was up there for a couple months. In fact, Captain Bartlett came up, and because the HF was doing tours up there, they'd come up for a couple weeks at a time. And so I got up there, was we had Runyon and Oliveris. I forget who all was up there when I was up there. I think Fred Camacho was up there too. He was in our company. Anyway, Captain Bart came up. So he comes over one night and he says, ask us to get a hold of the guns down at Camp Carroll. So we get Camp Carroll on the line. And Camp Carroll, if I recall right, they had 8 inchers down there. They're not notoriously accurate, but they have pretty good range. They had about a 40-kilometer fan, if I remember right. So when you 950 the Hickory, you could look down at the Quezon airstrip, and you could also see the hills coming down from the DMZ, 80, 81 north and 81 south, coming out of the DMZ. And there was trucks coming down those hills, and Captain saw the truck park where they're parking. So he called an airstrike. I mean, artillery. Hit him dead center with the first round. I mean, there was a heck of an explosion up there. And so that was a nice accomplishment. There was so much stuff in Quezon. We had a 57 millimeter recoilless rifle up there. And we had some Willie Pete rounds for it. So one day, just for fun, we thought, well, let's see how far we can shoot this thing, you know. So we decided we're going to shoot straight out, see how far it'll go, and then it'll drop, right? And we used Willie Pete because then you could see it hit, you know. So we're firing out towards Quezon, which is west. Thing hits down at the bottom of the hill. We have like 3 secondary explosions within 30 minutes. All kinds of stuff down there. I mean, I think you could almost shoot anywhere in Quezon and hit something. That was a big staging area for them all around that place. So anyway, I was up there till it was after Thanksgiving. I remember because they tried to get us Thanksgiving dinner up there for 2 days. We finally did get it. And I remember because Runyon ran out of cigarettes and actually walked through an uncharted minefield twice to go down to the LZ to get cigarettes resupplied, along with some food, because we were running out of food too. Anyway, I left there. That would have been probably about mid-December. And so I'd been up there for, well, between the two radio relays, I'd been up there for right after Thanksgiving. I went up, so I was up there till around mid-December. And when you're up there, there's no you have no water. I mean, we were trying to get water from the clouds because the cloud would be over you a lot of the time, and you couldn't get resupplied. So you stink after a while. I also got the crabs from the sleeping bag that somebody else had before me. That always helps. Anyway, I come off that mountain. I get back down to the launch site. Major Angel meets me at the door of the orderly room. Says to me, "Don't enter my orderly room. Do burn those clothes. Go take a shower. I'll issue you a new uniform and come back and see me." So that's what I did. We burnt my clothes. I took a shower, got a new issue, and went back to see him. He said, "I want you to get out of here and I want you to get laid and don't come back until I tell you." I said, "I'd like to go to Thailand." He says, "I don't care where you go. Just go." I said, "All right." So I went down to Da Nang and flew over to Thailand, NKP. Well, I got to NKP. Jimmy Wheeler was just leaving to go in R&R the next day, and he was their radio man. So Shelton says, "You're going to be my radio man until Jimmy gets back." I go, "Well, that's cool." So Jimmy takes off. I won't tell you other stories about Jimmy and I, but Jimmy, before he left, he did show me how to get rid of the crabs in one night. And I'm not saying that he had experience, but he sure knew what to do. And it worked. So I know it worked because he didn't complain about it later. So everything was good. Anyway, I'm up there, and about a few days later, Donahue, the idiot commander that we had, found out that I was in NKP, and suddenly I became a valuable commodity. Now I have to tell you the story about me and Donahue here for a second. I came back off that HF mission, and the day I was supposed to go up to the Quang Tri launch site, Pappy Grimes, who's an old timer, had been in SF and 101st Airborne for about 3 or 4 years over there already. He was assigned to take me to the airport to get on the Blackbird, go up to Quang Tri. So we go to the airport. There's no Blackbird. So we come back. Well, Monday morning, I really hear about that. It's like report to the commander, So Pappy Grimes, being a stand-up guy, he goes up there with me. So we get to Sergeant Major's office, and he starts ranking on me. You missed movements. We're going to give you an Article 15, all that stuff. So I told him there was no airplane, and then Pappy said there was no airplane, and McIntosh, the Sergeant Major, didn't take a hint, and he kept going on and on. So finally, Pappy Grimes, who's a very big guy, leans forward, puts his arms on the desk, the Sergeant Major, and he says, "Sergeant Major, are you calling me a liar?" And McIntosh goes, "No, Pappy, no, I wouldn't say that, Pappy." He says, "Good, because the plane was not there." So then we get that over with. I got to go in and see the colonel. Well, at this point, I'm not feeling too gracious. So I go see the colonel, and he goes into more of this stuff, and he just ratcheting himself up. And finally, he says to me, I have your Bronze Star with a V over there. Orders for your Bronze Star with a V. I have half a mind to tear it up." And I said, "Well, sir, I thought only the briefs would be getting the medals, and frankly, you can put it where the sun don't shine."
Ooh.
Well, This guy loved medals. I'll tell you that story later. But he turned beet red, went over on his desk and wrote void across my orders for the Bronze Star. So, needless to say, when I left CCN, I had never had a medal. So, even though I've been on missions where everybody got a medal but me, that's how life in the Army is. And besides, truth of the matter is, I wasn't there for the medals anyway. Just how it works. So anyway, I'm Donahue's most needed commo guy. He's got to have me back. Well, I'm working for Major Shelton. Phil Shelton was a heck of a commander. He was. He's one of the nicest guys, one of the most stand-up guys, and one of the most I'm for you guys that I ever met in my life. So Shelton goes down to Chief SOG, calls up Chief SOG. Well, Chief SOG and Shelton were pretty tight. And he was like the fair-haired boy, Shelton was, of the Chief SOG. So Chief SOG pulls rank on Donahue and says he's staying there until Jimmy Wheeler gets back. He needs him. So here's how he needed me. He says, here's the deal. Every morning, 8 a.m., you're in formation, you look sharp. If I got something for you, I'll tell you. Otherwise, you're dismissed. See you tomorrow. Well, see you tomorrow. It's Christmas. You know, we're not running many missions, Christmas and New Year's. So I'm downtown every night. And we had a Christmas party. Now you have to know something. This compound is in the middle of NKP. Well, it's on the edge of NKP. And it's a secure compound. You cannot go into that compound unless your name's on the list. Okay? There's Air Force security guards on that compound to keep you out. So we go downtown with the embassy van and load it up with girls that night. And the head of security for NKP's there, some of the Covey pilots, some of the helicopter pilots, some of the SPAD pilots, and us. And then we're having a huge compound party that night. Of course, all the classified stuff's in another area and everything's locked up and all that stuff. But I thought it was so funny. Here we are in the most secure compound in NKP, and we're having a party. It was good. But that's how Shelton was. Work hard, party hard. He was a great guy. And Shelton was also a good friend with my friend Bill Vitoon from the Opera Hotel. Well, anyway, I stayed there over Christmas and New Year's. Got to see the Bob Hope show. That was fantastic. He came over to NKP. So then I went back to there's me and Bill Vitoon. Vitoon and I stayed friends up till the day he died. When I moved back to Bangkok there for a while, I actually lived in his house. He had a house that he had bought. I lived in that, and he was a character. Him and Bill Shelton snuck him up to NKP and passed him off as a pilot. Shelton was doing all kinds of things. I had a bunch of pictures, but can't find them right now. That it was actually Bill's pictures from NKP.
Oh wow!
But he was quite a guy. We had a lot of fun together. Every mission I ran, I got a stand down. I went to Bangkok, and I ended up marrying a Thai girl at the end of my tour. So anyway, I get down and I get back to the base, and I go down to Recon. So I told him, to the company commander down there, I said, look, I don't want to run with young guys, because I'd been there. I mean, when I was at CCN, we had some giants, man. I mean, really, had Pat Eddington, Lynn Black, Tilt Myers, Dutch Ranga, Captain Rob, Wunderlich, Lieutenant Dugan, Dave Maurer, Jerry Plank, Buck Buchanan, Elgin Bardwell, Jim Butler. Yeah, that picture right there, by the way, if you look, you see Pat Addington where you got the thing pointed. Go left 2, right there. That's Benny Malto. He's Filipino. And Benny and I went to recon school together. So I gotta tell you this one. This is funny. I'll tell you some recon story jokes now. So Benny and I go into the PX at Long Bend. So I go, let's put one over on these people, because we're always pranking people, So we go in, yeah, that's my team. There's Oliveris and yeah, Charles Miller and the Miller. He was the instructor. And over there with that 79, with that right there where your thing is, that's Hannah.
Ronnie Hanna, yes, sir.
Yeah, Ron Hanna. He was on Hawaii. And anyway, so we go into the PX and he's talking Tagalog and I'm talking Brew, and we're going around the PX talking to each other, And then finally the PX manager comes over and says, "You can't have him in here." And I go, "What are you talking about?" He said, "He's not allowed in here, I said, "Yes, he is." And he goes, "No, he's not." "Yes, he is." And then finally, Benny pulls out his ID and says, "Who says I can't be in here?" So it was always a lot of fun. He was a fun guy. Anyway,
Man.
we had most of the guys running Recon were E4s and E5s. Occasional E6, but most of them were 4s and 5s. And one time we got a whole bunch of second lieutenants. They decided, that maybe if they sent us a bunch of officers, things would get better. Well, they didn't get any better and they left. And Dugan and Wunderlich and I think Gary Robb came about that time. They were the survivors of that group. They had a couple killed and some of them just didn't work out. Anyway, I said and we just got in some senior NCOs. And I said, I want to be with one of those guys. Well, they assigned me to Billy. Well, Billy Van Meter was on his 3rd tour to Vietnam, and he had a tour in Laos. He'd been in the Army 12 years. He's 38 years old, and he had 10 years overseas. And he'd been in Korea for a while. Yeah, that's Fred Wunderlich. Fred was a friend of mine until he died too. Hate burying friends, I tell you. Anyway, so Billy and I hit it off really good right from the very beginning. Billy was a good old boy from Texas, soft spoken, didn't say much, liked to drink, but didn't get drunk, he just drank, and real quiet guy. And if you looked at him around the compound, he was like nothing special. You get him in the woods, different guy. He knew his stuff. And he had been around for a long time in Asia, He knew. He told me he'd been to Vietnamese language school twice and still couldn't speak a word of Vietnamese. Anyway, so I got on Billy's team and they sent me straight away to Recon school. So my Recon class down there, I had some winners down there. Rob Graham was one of them. And I had Benny Malto and let's see who else. Oliveris, Dumami Duran, Bill Duran. Yeah. So that's the whole bunch there. I don't even know if I'm in that picture. Ron Hanna. We had Carpenter. We had some really good guys in that class. And we had kind of a fun class. So we were doing naughty things all the time, and we went up to Long Bend to go to the PX as a little break, right? So we're coming out of Long Bend, and Rob Graham's driving. Okay, well, driving isn't quite the word for it. Rob is is trying to keep this thing between two ditches. And he ain't doing a very good job of it. And so finally, the lieutenant, who is slightly less inebriated, I say again, slightly less inebriated than Rob Graham, convinces Rob that he should drive. So Rob pulls up in front of the PX, I mean, not the PX, but the MP checkpoint, and stops the truck to get out to let the lieutenant drive. Well, as he gets out of the truck, Rob's carrying this carbine that's sawed off. It looks like a big pistol. He used to carry that when he was using his bow and arrow. I mean, the time Rob went to Recon school, he had 22 missions already. Okay. So it was like, we always said, you get to go to 1-0 school if you survive. So that's how that worked. Anyway, that carbine pistol falls on the ground. Well, the MP saw that and decided he wanted that pistol. And he says, who authorized you to have that weapon? The lieutenant says, I did. You know? So, well, this little confrontation is going on. The rest of us are in. There's about 10 of us in the back of a deuce and a half. And we're over there watching this thing, leaning over the rails. And we think this is really funny. You know, this is quite the scene. The MP, the drunk lieutenant, and the very drunk Rob Graham arguing over who authorized who to have what. And of course, this MP has no idea what's going on. So the second MP steps out of the little MP box, decides things are getting a little bit out of hand. And because he's got a 45, he can obviously straighten this thing out. So he reaches down and then flaps his holster of his 45. And at that moment, he hears click, 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 click. Everybody in the back of the truck locked and loaded. Now he's looking at about 10 CAR-15s. It don't look good. So being smarter than the average polar bear, he puts his hand straight back down, backs up into the MP shack, and the first MP shuts his mouth, and the lieutenant starts to drive us away. And that's kind of how things go. This class is like that. We got in lots of trouble. We gassed the civilian contractors next to us, and we did a lot of things that they didn't like. And when we left, because they had kicked out this lieutenant because we gassed the people next to us, they kicked him out of class. We didn't think that was fair. So when we left that day, everybody threw smoke and threw gas in the middle of the smoke just to gas up the compound there before we left. So anyway, that's kind of how that went. Anyway, I got back up to CCN. In the meantime, Billy had recruited a brand new team. We did have our interpreter had been the interpreter for Brown and Shoe when they got wiped out. And I'm not going to use his real name here. I'm going to use the name Ping. And Ping had been sitting idle for about 3 months at that point. And it was pretty traumatic. He also lost his brother on that deal. And anyway, I was told that he was our new interpreter, so I went over to wake him up, and he was sleeping in his bed, and I went over there and started bouncing on his bed, and I said to him in Brew, "Kayung tiyung muchala," which means get up, you're really lazy. And he thought I was a Brew, so he turns around, he's going to punch me, and then he sees it's me. And he goes, "Who are you?" I said, "Oh, I'm your new 1-1, you know." So that was the beginning of an interesting relationship between Ping and I. The team was a totally new team, so we trained for about 2 weeks. And that it did in 2 weeks. You go, "You guys are training too long, you need to start running missions." So, okay. So we get our first mission. And then this is where the trouble starts. I started the trouble. I'm not proud of this because of what happened later, but what happened was that Billy went off to fly a visual reconnaissance of the target and pick out the LZs. So told me, he said, train the team for half days till I get back, because he's only going to be gone a couple of days. We've been training every day. We've been training pretty hard. We're putting in like 8-10 hours a day, 7 days a week, till trying to get the team trained up, And I said, okay. So we'd train till noon, and then I'd have the afternoons off, give everybody afternoon off, and clean weapons and whatnot. And so I'm sitting in the club, and I get this phone call. Why aren't you out training your team? I said, because I trained. I hung up the phone. Go back to drinking. Next day, same phone call. Why aren't you training the team? I said, who is this? And it turns out to be the S2 guy. Well, it's like, hello, you're S2. What do you call me for? So I go over to see the Recon company commander, and I say, sir, we have somebody who really wants to strap hang with our team. I mean, he really wants to be a part of this mission. And he just really wants to go. And I go on and on for a little bit, and the captain gets this funny look on his face. He says, all right, Brew, what's the problem? So I said, this guy up in S2 has called me twice now. And I explained to him that we're training half days, and Billy's flying the VR and that. And he says, I'll take care of it. I guess he took care of it. So Billy comes back. Of course, he doesn't know anything about it. He goes up to S2 once he gets back off his VR, and this guy tells him, well, you're one ashore, a smart ass. And Billy goes, he may be a smart ass, but he's a good recon man. So that was the end of that story.
Wow.
So from that day on, that guy had a little thing going for us, and he badmouthed us until the end. And he caused us a lot of troubles. Anyway, I'm going to talk for just a second about the relationship between a 1-1 and a 1-0. Because you know, I think the way things work now, every CNC, and in different periods of time, there are different cultures, and in different teams, there are different cultures. But I would say I was so fortunate that I've had in the HF and in Recon, I've had really good leaders. And I know people had some really bad ones. In fact, Bud Masterson, when he came to our team, it's because he was on with another 1-0 that he didn't trust, and he left the team. And the guy ended up getting killed later. Or somebody wouldn't listen to anybody and thought he knew how to do everything. And there's one thing you learn really quick when you get to Recon: listen, learn, never stop learning. Yeah, he was a good guy. So the 1-0, the way it always worked between me and the 1-0 was this: the 1-0 did the mission overview. He got the mission from S2. Then we'd go over the mission together. He'd get target folders. We'd sit down and look through everything. Then we'd get the topo map out, and we'd start planning the mission. We'd look for possible ambush places. We'd look for places where, where we thought there might be enemy, where it was a natural choke points, those kinds of things. We tried to get that really down in our head before we did the mission. On the ground, he's the team commander, But my job, I always carried the radio for every team I was on. And I called the airstrikes. But not every 1-0 would allow that. A lot of 1-0s wanted to be totally in control and have the radio. But I always called the air, and I always had the radio. And when the fighting started, I tended to do more of that than I did shooting. I mean, I'm trying to get us out of there. I had the biggest weapon of all. I had the planes, So I concentrated more on trying to get us out that way rather than sit around all the time with it. I mean, there's times when you can't, of course, you got to shoot. But if you got time and you've got space, the best thing you can do is spend that time and space bringing some big, heavy stuff down on the other guy. So that was kind of my thing. And so when like getting ready for the mission, they would fly the VRs. They would do the initial briefings for the talk and all that stuff. And I'm doing all the team stuff. I'm getting the team ready. I'm getting the mission prep done. I'm getting all the P's and Q's stuff. That's my job. So he's free to do his work. I'm free to do my work. And then when we get into isolation, then that's when we kind of bring it all together. We brief the team what we're going to do. We also coordinate a little bit more on final loadouts on everything for people. So that kind of stuff is my job. Like the equipment, I would do all the equipment checks. I would do the training. I would do the day-to-day stuff, and he would do the higher level stuff. That's how that worked. And a lot of teams work like that. There's a real good rapport between the 1-0 and the 1-1. The trouble is, a lot of guys, I think, were forced into being a 1-0 before they were ready. And it's a big jump from 1-1 to 1-0. Your perspective is different and your responsibilities are different. And I was fortunate to have real good recon men. I want to say there's also a difference in teams. There are guys that went out there to shoot people, and there are guys that went out there to run recon, and they weren't the same people. Schwartzball was probably one of the best recon men at CCN. He ran the longest missions. He ran one 10-day mission, and I think an 8-day mission. And these are in areas where people get run out of. He was part American Indian. And he and I just fought alike. I mean, I remember one time, right before I left, I was on the radio up at the talk, and he's running the mission. And he's on this ridge line, and he'd been down setting up next to this village. And they spotted him. So run along this ridge line. And I told the other operator, he's going to do a J hook right now, and he's going to go back and he's going to set up right next to their village. And so what he did is they're chasing him. He blows CS powder on his back trail, does a J hook, comes back down, sets up next to the village. They had no idea where he was. He did exactly what I said he was going to do. And that comes into play later when we run our mission together, because it's a little different. Anyway, ran several missions with North Carolina, and I had the weirdest bad luck. I mean, first of all, there's contact on every mission. That's just a given. But some of the weirdest things happen. And I'll say this: if you didn't believe in God, go run Recon and SOG. If you don't believe in God after that, there's something really wrong with you, because, we all like to be super soldiers. But when you take 6 and 8 guys and you're fighting against companies, and some cases, Lynn Black fought against a division, and you come out with 1 or 2 killed or wounded, you ain't a super soldier. So you had a miracle happen. Yeah. There's some guys right there that are some recon guys. You can't get out of those situations by luck. It just don't happen. Okay. There is a little divine intervention going on there. And I'll give credit where credit's due. Anyway, I'll tell you, the weirdest thing that ever happened to me. I mean, this is, when you hear this, you're going to go, what? So this is third or fourth mission on North Carolina, taking in a sniper. And we're inserting, we're in the Ashaw Valley is a long valley, comes out of Vietnam, goes into Laos. And that was the bad place, number one. Well, just on the other side of the mountain from the Ashaw was another valley. And it did not empty into, it was blocked off at the end, you might say. So it didn't go right into South Vietnam. We had some small trails coming out of it, but it was a real long valley. It was probably, I would say this thing is 10, 15 kilometers long and fairly wide. And the really tall hills on both sides, like 6,000 feet. So we go in there and we're inserting the ladders. So Billy goes in first. He inserts. I'm coming in. Now I'm carrying an RPD on this mission. I carried an RPD differently than the guys in CCC carried theirs and later CCN. I carried the original, not cut down. And I carried it for a purpose. I carried it for whenever we're in the area where there's a lot of open areas or rolling hills and stuff like that, a lot of elephant grass. A CAR 15 is good for about 150, 200 meters. Okay. I mean, you had a very short barrel on this thing. It wasn't designed to be a long range weapon. And so you're shooting against an AK-47 that can shoot 350 meters. And maybe not accurately, but good enough. And with the RPD, I could keep them off out there to 500 or 600 meters. So that's why I carried it and carried it in original length, because I wanted standoff distance for the team. So I'm carrying the RPD. That mission I had 127 pounds of gear in weapons, and I weighed 150 at the time. So my chopper comes in. I start going down the ladder. Billy's holding the ladder, and halfway down the ladder, that's it. That's a beautiful gun. The only thing they could have done to make that gun any better would have disintegrating links. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. And if they chromed the gas rod inside there, because it was mild steel, and if you close the bolt, because it fired from an open bolt, but if you closed the bolt and stored it for a while, you'd have to hammer it out because it'd rust.
Oh,
yeah, not good. If they just chrome plated that thing, it'd have been beautiful. Anyway, so I got the RPD, it's hanging off the back end of me and coming down this ladder. Well, the helicopter starts getting turbine inlet temperature starts going high, and he can't hover anymore. So off we go over the valley. I'm holding on. I'm about half upside down now, and I got 127 pounds of gear trying to pull me down to the ground. And we're at 6,000 feet flying over this valley, and there's a couple brew up above me. And I'd had a problem. If I grab something overhead for a long period of time, my arms go to sleep. My fingers go to sleep. It used to be a problem when I was in wrestling, when we were doing the rope climbs and stuff like that. So my hands start going to sleep. I can't feel them anymore. And we come back in, and as we're coming back into the landing zone, we're flying upside of this mountain that we're going on top of. And there's this trail coming up the side of this mountain with a little shack in the middle of it. And I'm thinking some blind old man with a musket's going to stand out there and blow me right off this ladder, So anyway, we go back up the top. Billy grabs the ladder. I start to go down. I can't feel my hands. So I go down one rung and I start falling off the ladder. So as I'm falling off, I just push backwards. So at least I'll fall on my back and not get tangled up the ladder. And as I'm falling backwards, I'm thinking, the blasting caps and the C4 are in the middle pocket in the back. And I have this vision of hitting the ground and blowing up through the rotor. It was that momentary picture you get in your mind before you're about to die. Anyway, I hit the ground with a thud, and I was okay. Didn't break my RPD, which was good. So we're good. So now we're in the first night in the RON. We're laying there, and we're laying like in a head-to-head circle. And the brew next to me grabs my arm. When they do that, you just move your eyes. You don't move your body, because it means something ain't right. I look up. Here's this Montagnard standing there counting us. Like this, pointing his finger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're all watching him. Well, something you have to know about out there. Sometimes it's like a chess game. It's like the ultimate chess game. You got to figure out what the rules are sometimes, you know? So if you could shoot this guy, but number one, he wasn't armed. Number two, if you shoot him, somebody out there is going to shoot you. So obviously, their plan is not to do something tonight. Their plan is we're doing something tomorrow. Well, before Billy and I ran this mission, we're taking a sniper down in the valley to shoot somebody. We don't know who. He doesn't know who. It's a joke. But anyway, we figured we want to clear off everything on this mountaintop before we go down, because one thing you don't want to have is the enemy high and behind you. And we figured if there was a place where they were going to hit us, it's going to be at this one place right before we drop off this mountain. Well, sure enough, they were there. But this is something I'm going to tell you how good this team was. We're walking into this. There was pine trees. We wanted to clear that area before we went over the hill. It was the only area that had a sign of a stand of trees on it. So we go in there, and they had an ambush set up. But some little guy in that ambush got a little trigger happy and shot off before we were in the kill zone. And our point man just did a 180. The entire team did a 180, never said a word, never did anything, did a 180, and we walked out. Now, I know there was some NVA sergeant over there slapping some guy up the side of the head and going, "What's wrong with you? What are you shooting at, you idiot?" And he's going, "But I saw," and he goes, "What do you saw what?" Because no one saw or heard us except that guy. And so we went off. So at about that time, Covey showed up. So the way it works out there depends on your target areas. Some targets you could talk to Hickory, but those targets are generally north of the Ashow. They're out in the area just south of Quezon and up in the DMZ in that area. You get down to where we were, the airplane flies over you, you got combo. So you have combo twice a day. So we were just fortunate that was combo time. And so the Covey was up, and so he goes and gets a couple Cobras, and we ask him to fire the place up because anyway, he comes out, fires the place up. As soon as the Cobra makes their runs, they're open up on him. Clack, 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 you know. And the Cobras were highly offended, and they just shoot off about 100 rockets, and all that goes away. Well, one of the first rockets they shot down there, though, was nails. And the nail rockets, what they are is, you know, the rocket motor, well, the nails are all these little darts, and they're in a special cartridge. And after the rocket motor leaves and gets up to a certain speed, or so many seconds, I forget how it works, they explodes and blows those nails into the ground then. Well, the rocket motor, if they shoot when they're too low to the ground, the rocket motor is still going when it hits the ground. So and this is what happened in this case. Rocket motor hits the ground, starts a fire. So we have a little fire going there and burns out the area. And so this mission is obviously going south pretty quick. So we said to the hubby, look, what we want to do is get extracted out of here and then get reinserted tomorrow on our alternate LZ on the other side of the valley. Because, you know, they watched us do the insert. They know how many of us are here. You know, it's pretty obvious that this ain't working out too good. So we'll go to the other side of the valley, insert there, and come back in from the other side. Yeah, there's nail rocket for you. Lots of those little buggers. They go everywhere. You don't want to be there. So we're waiting for the choppers to show up. Finally, and we've been sitting there quite a while. And this is where we're sitting into an area that's got some dry bamboo in it. And so I said to Billy, I said, you know, Billy, we've been sitting here a long time. And one of the favorite tactics that they got out there is waiting for helicopters. They know they got the team sitting there and they want to take down the helicopter. The other thing is we're so far down there. This is a pretty southern target for us in quite a way. So we have 15 minutes on the helicopters when they get there. They got 15 minutes to pick us up or they run out of fuel. So in comes the helicopters. So I said to Billy, I said, I think maybe when they get 1 minute out, we ought to blow the claymores. Because we'd set up claymores around us. Billy said, yeah, I think that's a good idea. So I told the Covey, tell chopper pilots, when they're 1 minute out, we're going to blow these claymores. Just to be sure. In case there's something out there, we don't want them getting shot down. Well, when they get 1 minute out, we blow the claymores. The one claymore started to fire. And when the fire hit, it just took off suddenly. It was just unbelievable. Poof. All of a sudden, we got big flames. One of the claymores didn't go off, and the sniper said to me, he said, you want me to pick it up? And I said, yeah, pick it up, because we don't know what's going to happen next. We may need it. And the way we set up claymores is we don't set them up to where they fire straight out. They're set up to where they're firing at an angle, so we can set them up pretty close to us. So he's only like 15 feet away. He goes to pick up the claymore, and the fire just boom right between us. So he runs into the burned out area to get away from the flames. And of course, we're being pushed by the flames now. So we're running in the other opposite direction. So I got up on the ERC-10, the little survival radio, and he gets up on the ERC-10. We're talking to each other. And he tells me where he is. Okay, so I tell Covey where he is. And it took him a while to find where we were, and we come out on ladders. And so I come out first. And as soon as we were up like 50 feet in the air, there he is. 10,000 burned out acres where the rocket motors had hit earlier. And here's this, and one living tree, and one guy with an orange panel around his neck. Pretty hard to miss in the middle of all the black. Okay. So I'm up on the ERC-10, and I said, I see him. He's standing out in this area. And then Billy's chopper lifts off. Now, Billy's got both of our packs because we're on secure voice and the radios have to be hooked together. So he hooks both packs into his ladder on the bottom with D-rings. They lift off. They see the sniper. They go over to pick up the sniper, and they let Billy and the ladder down in the only living tree in 500 acres. Okay. So when the crew chief leans over and he sees that they got the ladder tangled up into the tree, they pulled max power, about pulled Billy off to the ladder, and in the process, pulled the two packs off, broke the links, snap links, pulled the packs off the ladder, and then they picked up the sniper and came home. Well, we get home, and guess what? We got no packs. Radio, secure voice, all that's gone. The other thing is we couldn't make it all the way back. We had to stop for fuel along the way at Firebase Birmingham because we'd taken too long to get out of there. We couldn't make it back. So they found out our radio was gone. Now they went back and napalmed the whole area. So I lost the first secure voice radio in Laos, but it wasn't my fault. And then we had a real idiot for a Covey that time. Very unusual you have a person like this. So we come off this target. Now we have no equipment, just our web gear. And he says to us, I'm going to fly you down to Da Nang tonight, get all your stuff reissued to you. You fly back up in the morning and run the mission. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. I said, we'll fly down there tonight. We'll pick up our stuff. We'll get a good night's sleep and we'll come back and run the mission. And he wasn't going to have that. And I said, well, then put in the backup team. Because sometimes on a mission, certain missions for certain reasons, unknown to me, we had a backup team. Well, we had one that day. I can't remember now if it was Louisiana or Mississippi who was the backup on this one. But anyway, he said, you would put in your backup team? I said, well, if you insist on this thing being run tomorrow, it's going to be run with a backup team. Well, The sniper is the only one that had his equipment. We didn't have it. So next day, because he insisted on running this mission the next day, and here's the thing, logically, there was no reason to run the mission the next day, because if you're after a specific person with a sniper, how would you know he's going to be on the other end of the valley the next day? You don't. So we weren't down there to shoot any specific person. They were just going to shoot somebody, you know. And so it didn't matter if you did it today or the day after, you know. So if he'd have waited one day, we'd have run the mission. But he insisted it had to be run the next day. So they ran it. So my buddy's running the backup team. And he says the next morning, you know, they look up, there's 200 guys online coming down the hill. They shot the Claymore firing device right out of his hand. They, you know, and they had a pretty good little fight going on because we'd really pissed them off, I guess. But I had all this kind of weird stuff like this happening to me all the time. You know, it's just like, how in the world do you do this kind of stuff? My last mission was somewhat similar. The last mission I ran was with Schwarzball. This is funny. So, as I said, they took our team from us. Political. It was all political BS. And mostly instigated through the S2. Of course, I have to admit that the sergeant major nor the colonel liked me very much. So I just felt bad later because of Billy, because I made trouble for him that he didn't need to have. He was a good guy. Anyway, I'm now without a team, and you know, I'm pulling guard duty and other wonderful things. So, you know, I'm over to club till about midnight, and I got guard duty till like 6 in the morning. So I get off at 6 in the morning, and I just get to sleep. Here comes Slade. Slade, Slade was E6. He was on his second tour in CCN, and he only did POW missions. He didn't want to run nothing else. His team leader, he had captured him before when he was in Quezon. And he told him, you got POW missions, I run POW missions. You want me to do something else, I ain't doing it. So Slade, you know, he's over there shaking me awake. And there's a famous phrase in SOG. This is a phrase that brings chills down your back. Have I got a good deal for you? Yeah, Billy Wall was one of those. Have I got a good deal for you? The pucker factor goes to 9.9, you know? So I go, okay, Slade, what's your good deal? I'm going on a POW mission today, and my 1-2 isn't in. I need 3 Americans, so I want you to come with us. And I go, so when are we leaving? He goes, this afternoon. I said, pack my stuff. I'm going to sleep. So I go to sleep. It isn't even an hour later. Here's Gary Schwarzball waking me up with the exact same words. Have I got a good deal for you? Okay, what's your good deal? Your good deal? Well, we're going to run this mission. It hasn't been run in 2 years because the last time they tried to run it a year ago, they shot down the SPAD prep and the LZ. Well, that's always a good introduction to a mission, you know? And I said, oh, okay, so when's your good deal? He says, oh, we got to do a little training stuff. It'll be a week or 10 days. I said, go tell Slade I'm going to take your good deal. So I go back to sleep, or try to. And here comes Slade again. Well, you don't have to come with us. So my 1-2 just came in on the flight, so he's going out. So thanks anyway. I go, great. I'm going with Schwarzball anyway. So this mission that we're going on is up near Bon Cry Pass, 38 clicks north of the DMZ. And it's the pass comes out of North Vietnam, comes right down this really steep hill, and it intersects with the north-south road. And I say road because at that particular place, you could probably put 3 deuce and a half side by side and drive down the road 60 miles an hour. It was big. Wow. And so, I mean, this looks interesting. So Gary and I talked about this mission quite a bit before we ran it. So we're so far north, and it hasn't been run in such a long time. And Gary'd run other missions up around that area before. He kind of he kind of knew a bit about that area. These guys up there were guys that were not combat troops. And they didn't get SOG very often up in there. So they didn't have the counter recon guys, and they didn't have a lot to do with us. So they didn't really know how sometimes to react to us. So we figured, well, if we get up there, one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to send too many or not enough. So, okay. So the other problem we have is the maps. Maps ain't always the best. So anyway, we go up there the first day, and it turns out to be there's not one hill, but there's two hills. And they put us on the wrong hill. Because from the hill that they put us on, you couldn't see the road. But when Gary landed, there was an LZ watcher, and Gary shot him, and so we pulled off the target. And that day, when we flew up there, we'd cut across North Vietnam, cut a little distance off the trek up there. And I remember flying over this plateau, and all of a sudden it just drops off into Laos. It was quite a sight. And they had a bunch of old vehicles, and I found out later that this was the famous fact track that they had up there, where they had a bunch of vehicles sitting around with some anti-aircraft guns. That got a lot of people shot at that were novices. We flew. I could see that place. So we flew in. We're coming back. So coming back, we took the long way, kind of straight down, and then made the corner coming around the DMZ. Well, coming down, we're at around 5,000-6,000 feet. We start getting anti-aircraft fire. Poof, just like in the movies, poof, 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 poof. And I'm thinking, I'm at 6,000 feet. I'm counting the number of rounds because there's a different number of rounds between a radar-controlled and a non-radar controlled gun. So I'm counting the rounds, trying to figure out if this gun's got radar control or not, because if it is, our shit's weak. And we're going 80 miles an hour. You know what I mean? Chugga, 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 chugga. And I'm thinking, and I thought this several times out there inserting and coming out of missions, man, am I glad I didn't go to helicopter school. I'll tell you a good story about that one. Bob Master Joseph. Some of you have read the story about Bob. Bob was the one who said, I'd give my right nut for a prisoner. And he did. Okay. He did. Well, Bob, after this one mission, comes out, and the Cobra pilot says, hey, I'll give you a ride in my Cobra. And Bob goes, man, we all wanted to do that, So it shows him how to operate the guns and the rockets and all that stuff. And they go out over the Quezon Valley, and they're flying around, and he's shooting at stuff, and he's just having a good time. And a 51 opens up on him, Well, the Cobra pilot was incensed that a single 51 would have the balls to shoot at him. So he says to Bob, we're going to go get that gun. Bob says, we're going to go home. He goes, no, we're going to go get that gun, man. And he goes, no, we're going home. And the Cobra pilot says, I want that gun. And Bob takes his car 15, sticks it over his shoulder, sticks it in the guy's face, and says, we're going home now. So they get back to the Quang Tri, and he goes, what's up with you guys, man? He says, you guys are in this stuff all the time. You're down in there. You're always in this, and he says, you get up here and a single 51 shoots at you, and you act like there's something wrong. And Bob says, listen, you're in an aluminum cockpit with plexiglass 38 inches wide, and up there ain't no trees to hide behind. So it was a different perspective, you know what I mean? Anyway, back to the mission. So we're running this mission, and so we get back. This is Schwartzball. Schwartzball is funny. Schwartzball, this is his third or fourth year in Vietnam. I tell you, like I said, I was so fortunate to have really, really, really good 1-0s. And actually, he got in like some special forces in the early days. It's not like special forces today. Today's highly regimented, we got all that stuff going on. But back in the beginning, it was a little more Wild West. And you could get into special forces a lot of different ways. You can't do that today, but you could then. Some commander could take a look at you and thought you had the stuff, and he could pull you in. So what happened with Schwarzball? Most people don't know, but there was the beginning of LRP units was started in Europe with the 7th Corps. And that was actually set up as a test operation by, I'll think of the name later, starts with an M. He's a colonel, and he worked up in the Pentagon in the Special Operations section of the Pentagon. And that thing was set up because he knew what was coming in Vietnam, and he knew what they needed. So he set up a LRP's training school. Montrose, I think was his name. So he flew out several times to kind of watch the training and watch people. And that's where Mad Dog Shriver came out of the school, and a few other recon men later. So Gary had a hobby of infrared photography. He learned how to do infrared and he got pretty good at it. He was a photographer, and he'd actually grown up with doing gold mining in Central America with his dad. So he knew jungles. He'd been in jungles down in Central and South America. He was a little older. He was 26 at that time. He was an old guy, among us. And anyway, Montrose found out that he could do IR photography. And so he told him at the time, he said, if you want to do something interesting, call this number. He gave him Mrs. Alexander's number. So Gary gets sent back to 101st Airborne, and he's in trouble because he doesn't like it too well, and he doesn't fit it with the regiment too well, and they're getting ready to do nasty things to him in 101st. So he calls that number. So they sent him to Vietnam, and gave him a bunch of IR film and a camera and sent him out with a SOG team into Cambodia. Take pictures, and the first pictures that showed that the North Vietnamese were actually inside Cambodia. So he comes back, has 10 rolls of film, cuts off the airplane in DC, hands them to somebody, and goes back to the 101st. And he decides, this could be neat. So he calls him back up, and they send him back over. And so his first job was he was to go around and take pictures at all the A camps. But the real job was to kind of evaluate each A camp to see how they were readiness-wise. So he finished that assignment, and then they sent him to an A camp. So he stayed in A camp for about a year, and he left there and he went to the Mike Force, stayed in the Mike Force for about a year, and then came up to CCN. In fact, he came up with another Mike Force friend of his, and they ran one mission. Buddy came up a little bit later than him, and he ran a mission with Schwarzball. And that mission, they crawled into some huge brush pile and laid there for 3 days, whether they were socked in the weather. And while they're in the brush pile there, Gary writes him a note, goes, "Welcome to CCN." And so when he came back, he tells his buddy, go down and take care of the team. He comes back and the guy's packing up. And he says, "This ain't me." And so he went back to Mike Force. I have to say this too. There are 3 kinds of guys. There are guys who can run singleton missions. They can go out with 1 or 2 guys. Snipers are a good example of that. You take a guy from the regular infantry outfit and you put him out there as a sniper, he's going to be scared to death because he doesn't have his cohorts around him, and he doesn't have security, and he doesn't have this and that. So not everybody can do those kind of missions. There's another kind of guys that work well with teams. And then there's the kind of guys who can run with bigger units. I'll tell you the truth. I go with a bigger unit. It scares me to death. Because I'm not in control, and I don't know what that other guy's doing, And that worries me, Team, where everybody is. Everybody knows what everybody's doing. You know what everybody's thinking. You're doing it together. That's me. it's not the same for everybody. And it's not to say that, one is better or braver or any more macho than the other one. It's not true. It's where you fit. So I found that I fit well in Recon. And in HF, I was probably a little too lax, a little too at ease, and that wasn't good either. So anyway, Recon was my thing. Anyway, so we get Gary anyway. He ends up at CCN, and he turns out to be just a phenomenally good Recon guy. And but sometimes, and I knew Gary pretty well, because the one thing that I did, that my dad told me something that I carried for the rest of my life. And he said, whenever you go somewhere, do what the experienced man does. So when I first got to CCN, well, I got to tell you, the first night at CCN, this set the stage for CCN. So I get assigned to Pat Smith's room, and Pat is, like I said, old timer there. By that time, he's been there about a year. I think he'd come off a Recon, going to HF. So we go down to the club, and 3 people are being promoted. And the deal was that if you're getting promoted, you put a week's pay up. Well, let me explain how much a week's pay's booth brings you. Okay? Mixed drinks in the club were 25 cents. Okay? A week's pay is about $100. So we had about $300-400 worth of free booze there. We had a stack a stack, probably about 3 foot high, of beer. We had a couple whiskey bottles. And because we were new guys, as newbies, we had to drink Recon Rex. Well, the Recon Rex, they had a shoestring potato can that probably held, I don't know, it would held at least 8 to 10 ounces. So it was a shot of everything behind the bar, and a shot of 7-Up and a shot of Coke. Trust me, when you finished that, you didn't need anything else. You were pretty well gone. So there's about a half a dozen of us drinking the Rex, and things are going on, And this is the introduction night for us. It's like, holy cow. So they close the club down at 11 o'clock. We go over to Recon Company. And we go over, I forget what team it was, but it was Jesus Diaz. Jesus was on the snakebite team. Completely wacko crazy. So we're sitting there partying. We just took what in the bar that hadn't been drunk yet and took it over to the Recon Company. And we're sitting there drinking. And Jesus says, "Oh, these people are asleep. Let's wake them up." He sticks outside his door with a car. Well, nobody moves. Everybody knows. There's Jesus. He's drunk. He's shooting off his car again, So everybody just rolls over and goes back to sleep. Well, then Jesus says, "I know how to wake him up." He grabs a couple hand grenades. He starts going to the door. Well, you got to know these hooches are like 15 feet apart. So if you throw a hand grenade out, stuff's going through the walls. It ain't good because this 1/4-inch plywood walls on these things. So as Jesus hits the front door, just at that moment, the Recon Company commander's there. "Jesus, give me those grenades." "But sir, they're smoke grenades." Well, there's a definite difference in size and shape of smoke and HE, So he hands him the 2 grenades. Captain goes off. Everybody in the hooch goes, "Oh, I'm glad that's over." And then Jesus goes back to his web gear and goes, "I got 2 more." At that point, we all leave. So I'm up at the other end of the compound because Recon's down at one end, the HF is clear at the other end. I go up the hill and Pat Smith's with me, and he says, anyway, about 2 o'clock in the morning, we get the rockets come in, hit the PODL dump next door to us. So apparently they're coming from the south because Marble Mountain's kind of shading us and not allowing the rockets to hit on us. So they're hitting the POL dump and they're hitting the POW compound. And apparently they were trying to organize an escape of POWs is what the deal was. First rockets hit, alarms go off, you know. I can't even see straight, you know. And Pat Smith tells me, stay in the room, turn the lights off, and don't move. Okay. Pat takes off, comes back later, you know. Well, about 4 o'clock in the morning, we get a second wave comes in. So this one, I think, now I've got to make this one. So I put the wrong boots on the wrong feet, grab my weapon. So I go out the door, and across the way from me is the two guys that came in with me, with the Charlie Miller and Buck. And they're laying on their bunks, bare ass naked, completely drunk, completely passed out. So I go over there and I start shaking the beds. I mean, I'm literally bouncing a foot off the bed. They ain't moving. So I said, well, that's it, boys. I'm going. So I go out to the bunker line. I didn't even know where I was supposed to be. You know, I just got there. I made it out to the bunker line and fell in and stayed there till somebody woke me up to go home. But at least I had witnesses that I made it to the bunker line, so I didn't get the Article 15, which Charlie Miller and Buck got. Cost him $800.
Oh,
And Miller was on his second tour, and his father was one of the original SF guys, and he was kind of unintimidated. He didn't want to be there anyway. He had a cushy deal all lined up, and he's going, you guys going to SOG, and then he comes down on orders, you know. Charlie tells the Sergeant Major, he says, well, Sergeant Major, I guess we just bought a collar TV radio stereo combination for the old soldiers home, didn't we? He was unintimidated. Anyway, that was my introduction.
God.
So back to the mission. So this mission, we get off this, we come down off this getting blowed off the LZ there, and we come back to the launch site, and Gary says to me, if we don't make it in tomorrow, we're going to insert in the DMZ and walk in. I mean, this is Gary. Sometimes he does stupid things like this. And I said, well, there's just one problem. He says, what's that? I'm going back to Da Nang and you can walk in by yourself. Well, what do you mean? I said, let me see if I can explain this to you. If we don't get in tomorrow, we're going to insert in the DMZ and walk through 38 clicks of the worst NVA in the world to get to our target area. And he stops and thinks about it for a second. He goes, oh, yeah. Anyway, the next day we land on the right hilltop. And we're only about, I don't know, 200-300 meters from the very crest of this hill. A little one ship LZ by Elephant Grass. And we land, and there is a high-speed trail going straight up the mountain. So what I'm going to tell you next will make most recon men just get cold shivers, and they'll go, how in the world did you do that? But we walked up the trail. And the reason we did, you know, it's funny because I told you Gary and I just think alike. We land on this trail, and he looks at me, and I just nod my head, and he nods his head, and off we go. Because we know what's going to be up at the top of that hill. There's going to be an outpost. And as I said, these guys had never seen us. There hadn't been any SOG teams in that area for at least 2 years. And we know that there's a big unit down there because we saw telephone wires in between the two hills. When you find telephone wires, you're finding lots of folks. But there was 0 people on the LZ. Okay. And so we started up this hill. Sure enough, they got an OP up there. Nobody's home. And these guys, we found that, you know, they had been eating Portuguese canned tuna. Lots of it. They had They ate well up there, okay? Because remember, these guys are close to the beginning of the trail. They're right up on a pass coming out of North Vietnam. They're getting the good stuff first. You know, the guys down the line, they get the leftovers. These guys up here, you know, they don't live hard. They're living pretty good. So they had like a little picnic table set up there, little thatch roof thing to sleep under, and you know, when they went up there to pull duty, it was basically to watch airplanes, see if there were any airplanes, and give a heads up. That was it. And they didn't do it every day, and they didn't do it every night either. So we walked up there and sat down in the middle of their little shack. So Gary and the tail gunner, I'm at the very top of the hill behind a big tree, and the team's around me. And Gary and the tail gunner are down about 10 meters, and they're setting up with their back against this little picnic bench that they built down there. Now, on the ground, there were these big paddle leaf plants. They came up about foot and a half off the ground, and it just covered the top of this hill. And there were some pretty big trees in there, you know, probably 60, 70-foot trees. So they're just sitting there in the middle of the open, leaning up against these bench, and here comes 4 guys, diddy bopping up the hill. First guy's got his weapon over his shoulder, but the second guy, you know, do they see Gary out in the middle of the open area with the tail gunner sitting there watching them 10 feet away? No, they see me up there at the top of the hill behind the tree. So the second guy, who is apparently the in-charge guy, he sees me, he starts to come up with his weapon, and when he does, Gary and the tail gunner blow away these 4 guys. And there's one guy, he's running sideways, and I'm shooting at this guy. Boom, 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 boom. And I see the leaves clipping, and I'm missing this guy. And I'm really pissed because I'm missing him. I miss him maybe 4 or 5 shots, you know. And he runs down behind this hooch. I can't see him anymore. So then everything's quiet. We're waiting. Pretty soon, this same guy who is running across that area that I'm shooting at him dropped his weapon. So he decides it ain't going to be good to show up back at the headquarters without a weapon. So he decides he's going to come back and pick up his weapon. So he peeks around the corner of this hooch, and Gary's sitting there with a sawed-off 79, and he is so fast. That was unbelievable. Blows away the corner of this hooch. The guy doesn't get hit again. So it's like Gary said, you know, some days it's not your day to die. That was one lucky guy that day, I'll tell you that. So it ends up I know what's going to go on. So I'm up at the top of the hill. So when we set up, I take the radio. I'm up behind this big tree. I set up the long antenna. I get out I start stacking magazines and a couple hand grenades because, you know, it's going to be one of those days. And so after this happens, I call Hillsborough. Took a while because Hillsborough's on the orbit. What most people don't know is that that's the command and control of C-130. They're in a big racetrack orbit. They can't pick you up all the time. It's only when they're down in the southern part of that orbit sometimes you can actually make contact with them. So I make contact with them, and I call it a tactical emergency. We could call 3 kinds of emergencies. A team emergency usually is when somebody's sick and you got to get them extracted. A tactical emergency, you may be in contact or about to be in contact, and you're requesting to be extracted. They can deny that, and usually our famous commander with his break contact continue mission, he would. And the third one was a prairie fire emergency, and for that meant you called the shots and they come and got you. So I I call it tactical emergency. I give them the codes that we've got a possible POW, and we went extraction. 45 minutes later, the Hillsboro operator comes back to me and said, "Did you all want an extraction?" And I'm sitting there for 45 minutes in the middle of, I know there's telephone wires down at the bottom of the hill. I know they sent 4 guys up. We've killed 3 of them, or 2 of them that we knew about. And it ain't good. So I said, yeah, I want an extraction. I want a prairie fire extraction like right now. So finally that got things moving. So they called the Covey. Covey comes up. So we get ready to come out. So now we got to go back down the way we come out, try to find these guys, see if we can grab a prisoner. So we start using gas. Using M79 gas rounds. So we're firing, we put on our mask and we're firing gas ahead of us. That way, and before we started moving down the hill, I had the Cobras come in and start firing up between us and the LZ. And they weren't taking any fire. In fact, they almost fired us up because they, instead of coming like across our front, they came directly at us, and one of the fins didn't open up and exploded about 20 meters down the hill and blew trees all over the place. And I spent about 10 minutes explaining genealogy to the fact pilot. But anyway, we come out going down the hill. I look over to my left and I see this log sticking up out of these ferns. Then I stopped and I said, "That's not a log, that's a leg." And I backed up, and there was this knee. Like I said, these ferns went about 18 inches high. They're real broad. And we killed one guy right at the beginning. When we fired the gas, he started crawling, and we could see the leaves where he's crawling, and we fired over there, and he was gone. But if they fell down, you couldn't see them because these ferns covered this whole area. The big palms, they're probably 12 to 14 inches wide and about that long. And they would be up around foot and a half off the ground, and they would just cover it. It was just like having a second layer of ground almost over them. So if they fell down, you couldn't see them. Well, this guy was laying under these palms, but his knee was up above the palms. So I told the team to stop. And the tail gunner shouts out to him in Vietnamese, "Hold up your hands." Well, he held up one hand. So the tail gunner shot him again. And then he held up 2 hands. So we went over and interrogated him pretty quick. And he said, he told us there were 300 guys down at the bottom of the hill waiting for them to come back, tell them what happened. So apparently their commander down there was afraid. He wasn't taking any chances. And that was a good thing for us that day, because otherwise it could have been pretty messy. Anyway, so we grab this guy. We go down. Chopper comes in, won't land. So I'm trying to lift him up over my head to hand him to the guy in the chopper. I can't lift him high enough. They're not coming low enough. So finally, I got wise enough to have him throw down the rope, and I hogtied this guy, and they pulled him up in the chopper. Then I climbed the ladder up in the chopper. The time I got him in the chopper, I couldn't even talk. I mean, I was done for. And I'm trying to tell the medic that he's trying to patch up his leg where he'd been shot. I said he's been shot in the butt, So this guy, he's gone into shock all the way back. We're trying to bring him around, trying to give him an IV, but he's so far into shock, I couldn't get an IV in him. Got him back to the hospital, and I said, "Don't let this guy die. He's a 30-day leave." He died 45 minutes later. Didn't make it. So we got the prisoner, but we lost him because of Hillsboro not responding for 45 minutes. And in fact, when we had some cards made up in Bangkok, our Special Forces card, and it says "Dead POWs are specialty." And so Schwartz gave one to Chief SOG, and he says, "Yeah, thanks to Hillsboro." Yeah, so we lost out on our prisoner deal that way. So Could have had a prisoner, unfortunately. So that was my last mission. And I made a couple of mistakes on that mission. At that time I was trying to get married, and Recon is 110% game. You can't be distracted. You've got to be in it all the time. The way that day as we're going up that hill, I stepped on a piece of dry bamboo, and the whole team looks at you like you're trying to get us killed. And then it's 5 seconds later, I stepped on another piece, and I came back off that, and I just told Gary, I said, Gary, I can't do 100% anymore. I've got this other stuff on my mind. Sergeant Major was messing with me. He wouldn't let me. He tore up my leave papers. He's doing all sorts of things to undermine me getting married at that time. It was a real problem. So I said, I just can't. I can't be 100% anymore. So I'm going to take this last 30 days and go over to HF. Well, I went up to see Sergeant Major. Of course, he ain't helping me out at all. So I asked him to go to HF. He wouldn't let me go to HF. So I finally told him, I said, well, Sergeant Major, I'm going to sit behind these 4-foot thick concrete walls with you for the next 30 days. That was the thing. We had some bad leadership when I was there. And that was Donahue, Colonel Donahue, and Sergeant Major Pillow. They were exactly the two worst people I have ever known. And unfortunately, they ruined a lot of good men in the process. Got a lot of men killed too. That's the bad part. So now that I've rambled on for a while.
Yes, sir. We've got a few good questions. We've got to close out the show tonight. They've got some very good ones. So let me get to the first one. Of course, Mr. John wanted to say hello, that he was here this morning or
Hello,
this
sir.
afternoon. Here's one. Infantry would like to know. He said he believes Jerry Poole was later MIA, and he was in 1-0 school. Could you share some stories about Jerry Poole?
Yeah, Jerry was in school with us. He was killed later in March, just a couple months later. Yeah, Jerry was just a nice guy. He was. I think like a lot of people, the CNC was a meat grinder, and I'll give you an example of things I saw when it's at the launch site. The launch site could not really support more than 2 teams on the ground. Because here's the deal: you got a package. We called it a package. So we got 4 slicks and 4 Cobras each day, or 4 gunships. If it was in the southern AOs, we would use Marine guns. Northern AOs would use Cobras. Anything below 3,000 feet would use King Bees, because above 3,000 feet they couldn't climb because of their engines. But below 3,000 feet, for instance, they could hover all day long. They could hover longer than any Huey, because they didn't have to worry about turbine inlet temperatures and all that stuff. So you get 4 slicks, you get 4 Cobras. So you put one team in, you come back, you put another team in. Well, the way things are going, you're lucky to run a 3-day mission as a general rule. So you can be sure that out of the 2 teams that you just put on the ground, one of them's going to have a prairie fire within the next 48 hours. That's just almost a certainty. So if you have 2 prairie fires, you can't really support them. Basically you've heard others on here talking about riding covey and having 2 prairie fires, and they're trying to handle both ends, and they can't because they don't have the assets. To do that, you need 2 coveys and you need 2 packages. And yeah, they can send you down whatever's flying at the time, but whatever's flying, it's just like when I was out with Captain Bartlett, they gave us F4s with 750-pound high drag bombs. Okay, we're calling these things at like 200 meters away, and we got shrapnel flying through the trees or all around us. In fact, Pat Smith, who's calling the air, broke his leg with a piece of shrapnel off the 750 because we waited for probably 45 minutes or better to get those. So you don't always get the things that work. You just get what's out there, And like the captain was saying the other day, okay, I'm an F4, I'm here, I've got, 5 minutes of fuel. What do you want me to do? And that's how it works. So they can't really support more than that. But SOG's always trying to push them to put 3 on the ground. Well, you put 3 on the ground, you're going to end up with a double prairie fire. Sure, it's the world, I just give you an idea too. This is official statistics, all right? In 1968, they ran 271 Recon and 56 Hatchet Force cross-border missions. Okay? 69, a year later, went from 271 to 401 Recon missions, and 56 HF went down to 40. Okay? The other thing is, who's running these missions? Well, they authorize TO&E, and that means if everything's wonderful and great and everything works as well, you got 30 recon teams per CNC. Well, we never had 30 recon teams because here's what happens. The average guy got killed or wounded by the third mission. Okay, that's just statistics. That's how it worked, So you get, it's like Gary. I don't know how many 1-1s he went through, because he wouldn't get him hurt, but they'd come around a mission or two with him. Okay, you're experienced now. You go over here. Bang, the guy gets killed or wounded or whatever. So you got this huge turnover of guys getting wounded for one thing. And so that means some teams are down, waiting for a replacement. So the number of teams that are actually running missions at any one time, 15, 18, maybe 20 teams if you're really lucky. And you find a few guys that are running a lot of missions, and some guys aren't running any at all, So when you got that kind of a turnover going on and you're running 400 missions, you're pushing things quite a bit. And they're trying to push them to put, get guys out there that are just, here they are, new guys. Bang, put them out there, Well, this isn't your everyday game, Even guys that are coming out of previous combat tours and experience, this is a different thing. It's completely different. And if you didn't know the rules of the game, if you didn't listen, you didn't last very long. And one thing I did when I got there, I spent I spent a lot of time with the brew. I spent an equal amount of time with 1-0s. I go to their hooch. I go over to the club. I'd ask them questions. I listened to their stories. I'd ask them about tactics. I mean, Lynn Black, he was a great mentor of mine. So was Pat Eddington, and I learned a lot just by talking to those guys. So when the time came for me to go out and do that stuff, I had a pretty good idea how the enemy worked and how things were, And you also, that's my first week at CCN. That's me and Chua. Chua is one of the HF guys. Spent a lot of time teaching me brew. Still had my baby fat on there. So if you listen and you learned, and I'll say one thing, the NVA was really, really, really good about adapting. They would learn so fast. You do something twice, you get away with it. Third time, they'd have you. and they disseminated their information widely. I mean, if they knew about it in the southern AO, they knew about it in the northern AO. So this is one of the reasons why these conversations we're having in the club and with each other were so important, because we needed to know exactly when they were changing them so we could change. And the guys would try something weird and off the wall and it would actually work, and then we'd try it ourselves. And then it would work until they caught on to it, and then you'd have to change again. So it was ever changing out there. And you had to know something about your target areas. I got to tell you about S2. They'd lie to you. Lynn told me this, when I first got there. I credit Lynn with kind of saving my life and sanity. Because when he got there, he told me two things. He said, these people will kill you. And your job is to take care of your team and take care of your men and bring them back alive. He said the second thing, he said, there comes a day when you have to quit running Recon. He says, only you know when that day is, no one else. But if you go beyond that date, you or somebody next to you is going to get killed. And I've seen it. I mean, that's baby son, same way. He knew it was time for him to quit, but he didn't know how to quit. Same way that Mad Dog. There's guys that do that. And I want to tell you, quitting Recon is the hardest thing that you can think of. When I quit Recon, I never went back to the club. I didn't go down to Recon Company anymore. I didn't go see my team. The only time I went down to see the brew was when these Americans that took the team got in a big fight and then got some of the guys wounded and went into our hospital, and I went down to the hospital to see them before I left. I never went back. It was too difficult. You feel like you've let everybody down. And even though it maybe sounds like, well, what do you think that, It's just how you feel. So it was, if Flynn hadn't have told me that, I probably couldn't have done it, to tell you the truth. But, there was guys that's been there for a long time, and what they would do is they'd quit and do another job for a while, then they come back to Recon. Like Eddington, he did that several times. Cliff Newman, when I was there, he was running isolation, and he did that for a while. Went back to Recon. Sometimes you just need a break. It gets the tension and it just gets to be a lot, and you either drink a lot or you take a break. And a lot of guys drink a lot.
We've actually got a question about the isolation. Jason would like to know, did you feel that the isolation at CCN or at the launch site helped at all with the leaks in Saigon?
No. Let me explain really what was going on, because we knew, okay, by 1969-70, we knew that there was a leak. And in fact, when I give my RON reports, I give them a false location. Because let me explain what really was going on in the background. Okay. In Saigon, at the headquarters for SOG, there was an NVA colonel who had access to everything. There was a teletype operator who was feeding information to the enemy. He's being paid off. I think he was working in the embassy. There was another American that they caught feeding information. The walkers that compromised the Navy. All of our reports, which went to RON reports, the team reports, all these things went through SyncPack. So everything that went through SyncPack, the Russians had it. That's why the B-52 strikes, they knew exactly where they were going to hit. So they had a little warning. So when we went in, they knew our LZs. They had the exact location of our primary and alternate LZs. When we filed once they inserted, the launch site would send a teletype message back through SyncPack with the insertion LZ the team members, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And that beforehand, that information, the target information, and all that was sent from CCN through SyncPack back to Pentagon. Then we sent the daily updates every night. We send their RON reports and all that. We go via SyncPack, which the walkers had compromised back there. So they had all that information. Within our compound, we had spies. You know, some of them were more low-level spies, but they were there. We always knew that they were there because the one thing the communists did extremely well was spy. Okay? You get on the ground, you got human trackers, you got LZ watchers, you got dogs. Okay? So as soon as you hit the ground, the game's on. And like I said, it's like the ultimate chess game. So the game's on. They're on you. They're RDFing you if you're on transmissions. You know, the trackers are on behind you. The dogs are coming. All that's going on, you know. And they, like I said, they know, you know where they're landing. My Robbie Robinson told me one time they coming in, they diverted to the alternate at the last minute, got into a little bit of a scrape, started to come out the primary. When they got to the primary, there's anti-aircraft guns on the primary. They'd been waiting for them because they already knew where they're coming in. It wasn't that they can cover every LZ for 5,000 miles. No, that's not it. They knew where you were going to be, and they covered yourself in the primary. So we did all kinds of little things to throw them off. Sometimes the last minute we'd divert, you know. I'd send them false coordinates at nighttime so that if they had that RON report, they came to the wrong place, you know. You do that kind of stuff, and sometimes you talk to the covey and tell them I'm going to have an offset, you know, offset me 100 meters every time, you know. We knew that. But here, the problem they got is politics, you know. They can't go over and give lie detector tests to the Vietnamese. The guy who was the closest advisor to President Tu was a communist spy for decades, you know, family friend. They were really good at that stuff. So isolation, it might have helped a little bit for the local spies that we had in the compound, but it did nothing for all that other stuff. It was compromised from the day the mission was conceived in Saigon until we got back. It was compromised from one end to the other. Like I said, if you don't believe in God, the time you left there, you would, because it was a miracle you survived. And I just want to say this to the aviators out there. I'm really glad I was not a part of that. Thank God I got thrown out of helicopter school. And my hat's off to all of them. They saved my ass. And everybody else's. We wouldn't be here today talking if it wasn't for those guys.
Absolutely. We've had the honor to not have some Covey pilots and some helicopter pilots, and God Almighty, what brave men! I mean,
they
all
were
around.
Extremely brave men.
Very interesting because we don't hear a lot about scoped weapons other than on, I guess, being on radio relay sites or what have you. But Jason was curious. Other than that initial instance with that sniper that y'all had, did you see many scoped rifles, or was that your only encounter?
Well, I remember one guy bought a scope and had it sent over for his 16, but as a general rule, no, because you know our contact is, we're talking, you can't even see 15
feet away.
meters.
Yeah.
So it really was a liability more than it was a help.
Yeah. And when you ended up getting your RPD, you said everyone we've spoken to, even down at CCC, and of course y'all being up north near the Navy guys, maybe had a little more luck. Well, how with guys having more than one RPD on the compound, where did y'all find y'all's links and everything to keep them running?
That was the problem. I was the first guy in my time frame to carry the RPD.
Wow.
And after I started carrying it, one of the other guys started carrying it, and we used to trade belts back and forth. I had about, I want to think I had 13 or 1400 rounds when I started out. And generally I tried to carry out around 1,000, 1,100 rounds when I went out. But by the time I left, we're down to 800. And because, every firefight, you're losing a few. And I went to EOD, Navy EOD. I went to different supplies. I tried Cisco, see if they would make some. I tried everything you could think of. I couldn't find any. And the closest I came was going to EOD, who said, "Oh, we just blew up a whole bunch of those last week." And I go, "Well, that's good."
Just your luck.
Yeah, just my luck. And that was really the big downside right there. And the reason a lot of guys didn't carry them because we couldn't get them. I'll tell you a funny thing about ammo, a funny story. So supply was running low in ammo. So they decided, okay, we're going to go down to Recon Company and we're going to collect the extra ammo. So they take a 3/4 ton truck down there. So 2 3/4 tons and then 1 ton truck later, or 5-ton truck later, they got the excess ammo out of Recon Company. Because like under my bed, I kept in cases of AK, case of 16, case of M79s, a few pounds of C4, case of hand grenades. That was my personal cash because, I didn't want to have to keep walking back up to supply and pick up stuff, So you always had that stuff around there. And besides, you never know. They might try to overrun us again. We'd have to have a shootout, So everybody had lots of stuff laying around.
Who did you were you living with another American or who did you run with?
every recon team, if you look at the pictures of the compound I sent you there of CCN, well, in the Recon Company, each Recon team had half of a hooch. Okay. So so the lengthwise it's divided in half, and in that half, then there would be 3 bunks generally. So the way it generally worked is most teams had 2 guys. The third guy would come along generally, and he'd join the team, and he wouldn't be there very long. It'd be kind of if the 1-0 and the 1-1 stayed together for a while, well, then the 1-2 would come in and out all the time. They would be training. They'd come in, run a mission or two with you, go to another team. Very seldom would you get a 1-2 that would stay with you. I mean, just like you hear if you read Brockhausen's book, they're always trying to break them up because they actually got 3 Americans on their team. It was so unusual, almost never happened.
But one of the questions, and I'm trying to find where it went. Jason asked it. What was the largest size-wise? What was the largest amount y'all went out with, and what was the smallest for your recon team-wise?
6 and 8.
Oh wow! Okay.
When we took out, when Bud went with us, we took extra people because if you got one wounded, you had to have people to carry him. And 6 men was just about ideal for recon because on one side, yeah, 4 guys are a lot easier to hide, but you have to look at the odds. What are the odds of you getting out of there without a firefight? And the answer is almost 0. You might get lucky. You might get a dry hole. It might be, your day of the week and everything goes well. But the number of times that happened, that people ran a dry hole or came out without making contact, you could number them on one hand in CCN, So you're going to get into a fight. Well, if you get into a fight, sooner or later, you're going to get into a real fight. And it's all about how many guns you got. And then it's about, if you get somebody wounded, who carries him? Well, the minute you carry him, you just took 2 guys out of the gunfight. along with the guy that got wounded. So you're down to a 3-man team, or maybe 4 if the one guy can carry him and the other 4 can shoot. Well, you start getting down to 2 or 3 guns, and you don't have much of a chance to hold people off. So it becomes an issue. And this is why we never went below 6. Now, we had guys that tried to run 4. I mean, the first one I know is this one captain. He tried it. He got killed. And he made a mistake of camping near water. That's another thing. Never go near water. We never went near water. Made everybody carry water. Yeah, it's heavy, but heavy or your life. Heavy or your life. Which one would you choose? Well, I always choose heavy.
Absolutely.
And I was heavy all the time. The lightest weight I had was 116 pounds, and the heaviest was 127. But when I carried the car, I carried 50 magazines.
Oh, God.
Well, 50 magazines. You think about this for a minute. If they were all full, they'd be 1,000 rounds, right? But you're too short on each one, so you're 100 rounds. You fire 900 rounds. A car can actually fire that in about a minute and 20 seconds. Okay?
Yes.
So what are we really talking about here? I tell you, that first mission with Captain Bartlett, that colored me from then on, because we ran out of ammo in day 3. We had to get resupplied. Okay, so number 1, I taught my team to fire semi-automatic. We fired fully automatic to break contact, and when we got beyond that, as much as we could, we fired semi-automatic. And I taught them to hit stuff, not just fire things. So ammo conservation was real high on my list of things to do. The other one was water. I learned to subsist on 1 canteen per day. I mean, you lose a lot of weight ways out there. You lose 10, 15 pounds on a mission, but you're alive, so that's a good thing. So I like on a LRP ration, I take a LRP ration and split it in 2 and eat half at each meal. And I just eat 2 a day. And that way I could get by with 1 canteen of water.
Jeez, I mean, y'all really are getting it to where you're really cutting it to the smallest intake possible to survive. I mean, that's amazing that y'all were able to do that, humping that much weight.
You have to, because the other thing, I did carry 1 can of sea ration fruit for each day. That was my joyful thing. Made each day a little better. But you have to. It's all about odds. I'll tell you how this works. Like I said, it's like a master game. It's like master chess game. Everything's about odds. So what you do is you do everything that you can to get all the odds in your favor. Now, you can only go so far. There's only so much you can do. But whatever you can do, if you're going to be smart about it, you put it in your favor. So I always did that. I mean, you want me to repel in? If there's a place you can land me, don't repel me in, because repel me in lowers my odds. Like the first time they repelled in out of CCN, the guy gets ready to jump off the thing, looks down, there's NVA all over the ropes.
God.
But guess what? 5 seconds later, he'd have been a prisoner. And that's the problem with repelling in. Repelling in sounds good, but when you got 127 pounds on your back and you can't go back up, there's lots of things.
It's terrifying.
You've got to look at these things and say, well, how can I make these odds work in my favor? So you also have these guys down in Saigon who sit behind a desk, and I guess they've read, too many novels or something. I don't know. So one of them flies up, and he comes up with this idea. So we go up for this briefing, and here's the briefing. Well, we're going to take an F4, and we're going to shoot this sensor in this ground on top of this mountain, and then you're going to fly over it, and we're going to drop you on that sensor in the middle of the night in triple canopy jumbo. Okay. And so how much training we get for this? Well, you're going to go down to the Long Ton. You're going to train for 5 days. So I said, let me see if I understand this correctly. We're going to take these Montagnards who have never jumped in their life. We're going to take them down there for 5 days. We're going to train them. And then we're going to go up there and jump into triple canopy jungle. And I said, first of all, at Ft.Bragg, where we have experienced jumpers, and we're jumping into 3-second drop zones, and we got guys in trees all over the places. And it takes forever to get them down a tree. I said, so while we're on the tree subject, how do we get down out of the trees? Well, you let down your reserve chute and you crawl down your chute. Well, this is the World War II version. Okay, we let down your reserve chute and it's hanging like 30 feet below you at the very bottom, right? So I said, well, there's just one problem with that. And he says, well, what's that? I said, you let down your reserve chute, you climb down your chute, and now you're 100 feet off the ground, and you can't get your arms around the tree because it's so big. Because these trees are 120 and 130 foot tall. I said, but just for the sake of argument, let's say we could get down to the ground. How do we get back together? Do we do like in World War II where they had the little clickers in their hand and go click, click, click? And I said, have you ever been in the jungle under triple canopy in the middle of the night? The guy says, no. I said, well, let me tell you a little secret. First of all, you can't see your hand in front of your face. And I said, the second thing is the jungle's not quiet. I said, there are noises. If you had one of those little click, click, clicks devices and you're 20 feet away, you couldn't hear it. You know, the crickets and the other things are louder than that. So we refused the mission. Well, 3 months later, or 2 months later, Captain Rob runs the first low level out of CCN. So I talked to Rob later about this. And I said, so here's what I told him, Rob. So what did they do with you? Well, first of all, they jumped him in an elephant grass LZ. They gave him a suit with a face guards so that if they hit the trees, they wouldn't get killed. They gave him a little radio transmitter, and everybody on the team had a receiver so that they could find him, so that they could all get back together again. In fact, one of the guys didn't work. He actually got separated from the team, and they did pick him up later. And so they jumped him in the elephant grass, and they had a way to get them all back together. And they did everything, and they also had a descender, 100-foot descender, in case they got caught in the trees. So all the things that I told them that was wrong with the mission, they corrected it and gave it to Rob. Yep, there he is.
I've actually spoken to the man on the far right, Sergeant Major Bob Ramsey. I had the honor of interviewing him and writing about this in a SOG storybook that's on sale. But that is one that's one for the books. If y'all have not heard about that, it's covered in one of the pucker factors, but I think Mr. Plaster also covers it. It was a 4-man static line insert, and I think they jumped from 300 feet, no reserve, because of course it's not enough room for a reserve. Separated, like Bruce said, and inevitably they get back together, but they jump right in the middle of a base camp or something to that effect, and it just goes wrong from get-go. But no one dies, thank goodness, and they do get back together. But nightmare.
Well, here, let me tell you about the second good idea that came up. So we have another captain comes out of Saigon with his good idea, right? So his good idea is, here's what we're going to do. We're going to fly you up to Mojia Pass. That's the northernmost pass coming out of North Vietnam. Famous. They've been bombing that thing. They've been dropping this commando clay on it. That was to destabilize the soil. They'd done everything they could think of. So now their next thing is to send us. So he says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take you up there, and we're going to put you in this karst sticking up in the middle of Mojia Pass and let you call air. And I said, wow, that sounds really neat. I said, So how do we get up there? Well, we're going to drop a fuel bladder in and then we'll refuel on the way up. Okay, that sounds really wonderful. So I said, well, there is a slight problem with this idea. And he says, well, what's that? I said, well, how big is the top of this karst? He says, it's like about an acre, in size up there. And he said, don't worry, they can't get to you. They can't crawl up the hill, I said, well, that's good. So let me see if I understand this correctly. You're going to fly us in. You're going to drop us on top of this rock. It's got about an acre up there. And down at the bottom of this rock are the best mortarmen in the world. And when these mortarmen see these helicopters landing on top of that rock, these mortarmen are going to start mortaring the top of that rock. I said, therein kind of lies the problem, because you can't dig foxholes in a rock. So when that mortar starts hitting those rocks, shrapnel starts flying in all directions. So we're going to have some wounded, and you're going to come in with a helicopter, which is what they're waiting for. Then they're going to start mortaring the helicopters, and then you're going to bring in some more helicopters, and there's only an acre up there, and pretty soon you're going to go, well, there's nothing more we can do. And I said, so thanks, but no thanks. And he goes, well, I thought you guys were the guys that always did these. I said, yeah, but we're not stupid. But this is the kind of stuff that you were getting into,
God, I think they ended up trying to get tilting them almost went on one of those missions. It got canceled at the last minute, I believe. We've got,
well, like I said, Lynn told me that they would try to kill me.
Thank goodness you recognized it though and said, no, I'm going to pass on that. We've got an interesting one. We're getting towards the 3-hour mark. We may have to break this up into a part 2.
My goodness.
Yeah, yes, sir. I'm gonna get to this one, and we'll close it out and see about if we need to get into a part 2. But this is an interesting one. I'm always interested in these. Dick Thompson mentioning in his new book, he used to leave Eldest Son magazines on the dead NVA before being extracted. Did you have any Eldest Son experience, or did you do anything like that Dick Thompson did?
Yeah, we pretty much always took what we take is the AK ammo out, either looser and like a stripper clip kind of thing, or in a magazine. And anytime we made contact, we'd try to throw some down. And usually they would give some to the medics when on extractions, so that they just throw them out on the ground when they're picking us up. And then the best is if you could, like when they started doing the mortars, there was a problem. The thing, I tell you how there was a lot more to this Eldest Son than what you hear. Okay, this was a big, huge psyops deal, and it was so well done. I mean, our psyops guys were amazing. So what they did was, we started planning pole beam, and like if we find a cache out there, we would usually leave the pole beam in and leave the cache. And so right after that started happening, they did this top secret report on the metallurgy of the AK-47. And basically they were saying that the Chinese AK-47s had problems with the metal and that they would blow up. So at the same time, on AFRN radio, the Armed Forces radio, they're always telling you, don't use captured weapons, don't use captured ammunition, right? So we got this big psyops deal going. They knew when they made this top secret report that the top secret would get compromised. So it's going right over to the VC saying, you got some bad gear there. The Chinese are messing you over. Well, you got to know, Vietnamese never liked Chinese, and Chinese never liked Vietnamese. So you're playing on that part, right? And then their guns are blowing up, right? And it's like, yeah, this is really what's happening, right? Well, like Fish Smith, he leaves us. He comes back. He goes up to the I Corps Rangers. He's coming. He diddy bopping down the trail out in Quezon. Comes around the corner. Here's this NVA. NVA pulls up, got him dead to right, pulls the trigger, blows his head off. And so after that, Fish says, every time I'm going now, I'm taking out pole beam, brother, because man, that saved my life, you know?
Oh.
So this went on pretty good. So they decided, well, let's expand this now to the 81 millimeter mortars. Okay. So first time they gave the 81 to a medic, he has a sandbag full of this pole beam, right? He forgets that he's supposed to throw it out on the ground, so he's up about 100 feet. He throws out the sandbag. Well, it's got the pole beam in it, and they figured out what was going on. Compromised the mission, but it was still successful because I didn't know one from the other, you know.
And just forgotten threw the whole bag out, man. All right, we are right at the 3-hour mark. Brew, would you mind coming back for a part 2 with us to go over some more stuff, because you've got one heck of a memory, and the men you were with and the stories you've heard along with your own experiences. We'd love to have you back.
Well, if you can tolerate it, I'd be honored.
We absolutely can. Maybe I know Mr. John already said he would like to sit down with us one day and speak. So I know we've got to set that up. So maybe next week sometime all 3 of us can get together and we can see about getting y'all back on and maybe together.
That sounds like a wonder.
Excellent, excellent. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we close out for part 1?
No, just thank you, and you know, I'm glad that our history is coming to light. We left a lot of really good men behind there that need to be honored. You know, I was just an ordinary guy that got to run with some giants, and I've always appreciated them and how good they really were.
All of you are giants, and every time I close out with one of y'all that y'all say the same exact thing. You speak about the other men and the men that were left behind, either deceased or some were POWs. But it's just an honor for you guys to take time, 3 hours of your night to share with us. It means more than you could possibly know. It's an absolute honor, and I'm glad I'm just able to platform it. I'm doing nothing special. I get thank yous all the time for it, but it's really you guys that are trusting me enough to come sit with me and share, and we just appreciate the hell out of it. I speak for everyone watching.
Well, 20 years from now, it'll really mean something.
I'd like to think that, and that's why I have got one of the viewers sent me a external hard drive, and every one of these I do, I immediately back them up as soon as I get done, for in case the person that we do the interview with would like one, or hopefully the 5th group will want them, or some museum one day. So I'm definitely holding out that one day we'll get these out to where the world can hear them, besides the YouTube world. But I guess we will go ahead and put a pin in it. We're literally about to hit the 3-hour mark, and we'll close it down for today until we get part 2 planned. Brew, thank you for spending 3 hours with us tonight, and I will be in touch with you here in the next few days.
Okay, blessings. Talk to you later.
Yes, sir. Have a good night.